What did you say? You have... Already set to the right time. This angel just got me, so everything's being sped up. Yay! Oh yeah, thank you. Is everything okay? Oh. Are you chatting with anyone? Are you chatting with someone? Oh, by the way, I have a little bit of input. Stretch's wife was one of the viewers the last time. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know her online name. I just thought you'd find it also when my stream ended. Bruce said good job, so I assumed he was one of the viewers. Or he just saw the messaging and knows when I stopped. I don't know. Not gonna lie, I really want to go back to playing that one game he got me. I'm having a lot of fun with it. I also feel special that I got a random game for no reason. Saw it had bunnies in it and was like, I must get this. And I think that it's super sweet. Also, it's early access, so it's like more stuff's on the way. I'm super stoked about that. We're gonna do like apples and make apple barbecue sauce. Thumbs up the pie filling. Red pies. Well, hi. The whole time? Oh my. It's a game called Dungeon Crawler. It's like Dungeon Crawler, but like claws, because it's got like one of those claw games where the little thing goes around and grabs stuff and then drops it in the chute. So you travel through a dungeon, and it's like turn-based, sort of like Paper Mario combat is with the enemies. Your little claw comes down and grabs things out of the machine, and those things are your items that you slowly accumulate as you go through the dungeon as prizes. And when you pick up those items and drop them in the chute, they do things in accordance to what they are. So like healing, fighting, blocking, poison. Sometimes enemies can throw stuff in there, like quick spikes and stuff that hurt you. Sometimes I ran across an instance where the whole thing got flooded with oil, so some stuff floated. Some items that are metal-based sunk, and I couldn't see anything in it. It was like pitch black, and everything had like an oil slick on it, so like there was like a mischance for both of myself and the target enemy. It was a lot of fun. I'm like really addicted to it. It's sort of like you run through every instance until you die, and then you start over and you can get a run, you get like a prize. I have not accomplished that. I've died a lot, but it's still a lot of fun. I didn't get to play it for very long, but I highly recommend it. Again, Dungeon Crawler. Clawler? Yeah, Dungeon Crawler. Oh, we're good to go. Okay. I didn't know that's what you said. Sorry. Okay, so we're going to be restarting the Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. I am going to be reading them in the story's chronological order, because that's the way that this, the book I have, it's like a compilation, how it's set, and it's just easier for me. So. Take that off so I can see. Chapter 1, The Wrong Door. This first book would be the Magician's Nephew. Okay. So, this is a story about something that happened long ago when your grandfather was a child. It is a very important story because it shows how all the comings and goings between our own world and the land of Narnia first began. In those days, Mr. Sherlock Holmes was still living in Baker Street, and the Bastables were looking for treasure in the Lewisham Road. In those days, if you were a boy, you had to wear a stiff Eton collar every day, and schools were usually nastier than now. But meals were nicer, and as for sweets, I won't tell you how cheap and good they were, because it would only make your mouth water in vain. And in those days there lived in London a girl called Polly Plummer. She lived in one of a long row of houses, which were all joined together. One morning, she was out in the back garden when a boy scrambled up from the garden next door and put his face over the wall. Polly was very surprised, because up till now there had never been any children in that house, but only Mr. Ketterley and Mrs. Ketterley, a brother and sister, old bachelor and an old maid living together. So she looked up, full of curiosity. The face of the strange boy was very grubby. It could hardly have been grubbier if he had first rubbed his hands in the earth, and then had a good cry, and then dried his face with his hands. As a matter of fact, this was very nearly what he had been doing. "Hello," said Polly. "Hello," said the boy. "What's your name?" "Polly," said Polly. "What's yours?" "Diggory," said the boy. "I say, what a funny name," said Polly. "It isn't half so funny as Polly," said Diggory. "Yes, it is," said Polly. "No, it isn't," said Diggory. "At any rate, I do wash my face," said Polly, "which is what you need to do, especially after—" and then she stopped. She had been going to say, "after you'd been blubbering," but she thought that wouldn't be polite. "All right, I have then," said Diggory in a much louder voice, like a boy who was so miserable that he didn't care who knew he had been crying. "And so would you," he went on, "if you'd lived all your life in the country and had a pony and a river at the bottom of the garden, and then been brought to live in a beastly hole like this." "London isn't a hole," said Polly indignantly, but the boy was too wound up to take any notice of her, and he went on. And if your father was away in India and you had to come and live with an aunt and an uncle who's mad, who would like that? And if the reason that they were looking after your mother, and if your mother was ill and she was going to die, and then his face went the wrong sort of shape, as it does when you're trying to keep back your tears. I didn't know, I'm sorry, said Polly humbly. And then, because she hardly knew what to say, and also to turn Diggory's mind to cheerful subjects, she asked, Is Miss Ketterly really mad? Is Mr. Ketterly really mad? Well, either he's mad, said Diggory, or there's some other mystery. He has a study on the top floor, and Aunt Letty says I must never go up there. Well, that looks fishy to begin with. And then there's this other thing. Whenever he tries to say anything to me at mealtimes, he never even tries to talk to her. She always shuts him up, she says. Don't worry, the boy Andrew, or I'm sure Diggory doesn't want to hear about that, or else. Now, Diggory, wouldn't you like to go out and play in the garden? What sort of things does he try to say? I don't know, he never gets far enough. But then more than that, one night, it was last night in fact, as I was going past the foot of the attic stairs on the way to bed, and I don't much care for going past them either, I'm sure I heard a yell. Perhaps he keeps a mad wife shut up there. Yes, I've thought of that. Or perhaps he's a coiner. Or he might have been a pirate, like the man at the beginning of Treasure Island, and be always hiding from his old shipmates. How exciting, said Polly. I never knew your house was so interesting. You may think it's interesting, said Diggory, but you wouldn't like it if you had to sleep there. How would you like to lie awake listening for Uncle Andrew's step to come creeping along the passage to your room, and he has such awful eyes? That was how Polly and Diggory got to know one another. And as it was just the beginning of the summer holidays, and neither of them was going to the sea that year, they met nearly every day. Their adventures began chiefly because it was one of the wettest and coldest summers there had been for years. That drove them to do indoor things. You might say indoor exploration. It is wonderful how much exploring you can do with a stump of candle in a big house, or in a row of houses. Polly had discovered long ago that if you opened a certain little door in the box-room attic of her house, you would find the cistern and a dark place behind it in which you could get into by a little careful climbing. This dark place was like a long tunnel with brick wall on one side and a sloping roof on the other. In the roof there were little chunks of light between the slates. There was no floor in this tunnel. You had to step from rafter to rafter, and between them there was only plaster. If you stepped on this, you would find yourself falling through to the ceiling of the room below. Polly had used the bit of the tunnel just beside the cistern as a smuggler's cave. She had brought up bits of old packing cases and the seats of broken wooden kitchen chairs, and that sort of thing, and spread them along from rafter to rafter so as to make a bit of floor. Here she kept a cash box containing various treasures and a story she was writing, and usually a few apples. She had often drunk a quiet bottle of ginger beer in there. The old bottles made it look more like a smuggler's cave. Diggory quite liked the cave. She wouldn't let him see the story, but he was more interested in exploring. Look here, he said. How long does this tunnel go on for? I mean, does it stop where your house ends? No, said Polly. The walls don't go out onto the roof. It goes on. I don't know how far. Then we could get to the length of the whole row of houses. So we could, said Polly. And, oh, I say. What? We could go into the other houses. Yes, and get taken up for burglars. No thanks. Don't be so jolly clever. I was thinking of the house beyond yours. What about it? Why, it's the empty one. Daddy says it's always been empty since we came here. I suppose we ought to take a look at it then, said Diggory. He was a good deal more excited than you'd have thought from the way he spoke. For of course he was thinking, just as you would have, of all the reasons why the house might have been empty for so long. So was Polly. Neither of them said the word haunted, and both felt that once the thing had been suggested, it would be a feeble not to do it. Shall we go and try it now? Said Diggory. All right, said Polly. Don't if you'd rather not, said Diggory. I'm game if you are, she said. How are we to know we're in the next house but one? They decided that they would have to go out into the back room and walk across it, taking steps as long as the steps from one rafter to the next. That would give them an idea of how many rafters went to a room. Then they would allow for about 4 more for the passage between the 2 attics in Polly's house, and then the same number for the maid's bedroom as for the box room. That would give them the length of the house. When they had done that distance twice, they would be at the end of Diggory's house. Any door they came to after that would lead them into the attic of the empty house. "But I don't expect it to really be empty, after all," said Diggory. "What do you expect?" "I expect someone lives in secret, only coming in and out at night with a dark lantern. We shall probably discover a gang of desperate criminals and get a reward. It's all rot to say a house would be empty all these years unless there was some mystery." "Daddy thought it must be the drains," said Polly. "Phew, grown-ups are always thinking of uninteresting explanations," said Diggory. Now that they were talking by daylight in the attic instead of by candlelight in the smuggler's cave, it seemed much less likely that the empty house would be haunted. When they had measured the attic, they had to get a pencil and do a sum. They both got different answers to it at first, and even when they agreed, I'm not sure they got it right. They were in a hurry to start on the exploration. "We mustn't make a sound," said Polly as they climbed again in behind the cistern, because it was such an important occasion that they took a candle each. Polly had a good store of them in her cave. It was very dark and dusty and drafty, and they stepped from rafter to rafter without a word except when they whispered to one another. "We're opposite your attic now," or "This must be halfway through our house," and neither of them stumbled and the candles didn't go out. And at last they came to where they could see a little door in the brick wall on the right. There was no bolt or handle on the side of it, of course, for the door had been made for getting in, not for getting out. There was a catch, as often is on the inside of a cupboard door, which they felt sure they would be able to turn. "Shall I?" said Diggory. "I'm game if you are," said Polly, just as she had said before. Both felt that it was becoming very serious, but neither would draw back. Diggory pushed round the catch with some difficulty. The door swung open, and the sudden daylight made them blink. Then, with a great shock, they saw that they were looking not into a deserted attic, but into a furnished room. But it seemed empty enough. It was dead silent. Polly's curiosity got the better of her. She blew out her candle and stepped out into the strange room, making no more noise than a mouse. It was shaped, of course, like an attic, but furnished as a sitting room. Every bit of the walls was lined with shelves, and every bit of the shelves was full of books. A fire was burning in the grate. He remembered that it was a very cold, wet summer that year, and in front of the fireplace, with its back towards them, was a high-backed armchair. Between the chair and Polly, and filling most of the middle of the room, was a big table piled with all sorts of things, printed books, and books the sort you write in, ink bottles and pens and sealing wax, and a microscope. But what she noticed first was a bright red wooden tray with a number of rings on it. They were in pairs, a yellow one and a green one together. Then a little space, and then another yellow one and another green one. They were no bigger than ordinary rings, and no one could help notice them because they were so bright. They were the most beautiful, shiny little things you can imagine. If Polly had been a little younger, she would have wanted to put one in her mouth. The room was so quiet that you noticed the ticking of the clock at once, and yet, as she now found, it was not absolutely quiet either. It was a faint, a very, very faint humming sound. If hoovers had been invented in those days, Polly would have thought it sounded of a hoover being worked all a long way off, several rooms away and several floors below. But it was a nicer sound than that, a more musical tone, only so faint that you could hardly hear it. "It's all right, there's no one here," said Polly over her shoulder to Diggory. She was speaking above a whisper now, and Diggory came out blinking and looking extremely dirty, as indeed Polly was too. "This is no good," he said. "It's not an empty house at all. We'd better bunk before anyone comes." "What do you think those are?" said Polly, pointing at the colored rings. "Come on," said Diggory. The sooner... He never finished what he was going to say, for at that moment something happened. The high-backed chair in front of the fire moved suddenly, and there rose up out of it, like a pantomime demon coming out of a trap door, the alarming form of Uncle Andrew. They were not in the empty house at all. They were in Diggory's house, and in the forbidden study. Both children said, "Oh!" and realized their terrible mistake. They felt they ought to have known all along that they hadn't gone nearly far enough. Uncle Andrew was tall and very thin. He had long, clean-shaven face with a sharply pointed nose and extremely bright eyes and a great tousled mop of gray hair. Diggory was quite speechless, for Uncle Andrew looked 1,000 times more alarming than he had ever looked before. Polly was not so frightened yet, but she soon was, for the very first thing Uncle Andrew did was walk across to the door of the room, shut it, and turn the key in the lock. Then he turned round, fixed the children with his bright eyes, and smiled, showing all of his teeth. "There," he said, "now my fool of a sister can't get at you." It was dreadfully unlike anything a grown-up would be expected to do. Polly's heart came into her mouth, and she and Diggory started backing towards the little door they had come in by. Uncle Andrew was too quick for them. He got behind them and shut the door too, and stood in front of it. Then he rubbed his hands and made his knuckles crack. He had very long, beautifully white fingers. "I am delighted to see you," he said. "Two children are just what I wanted." "Please, Mr. Ketterly," said Polly, "it's nearly my dinner time, and I've got to go home. Will you let us out, please?" "Not just yet," said Uncle Andrew. This is too good an opportunity to miss. I wanted two children, you see. I'm in the middle of a great experiment. I've tried it on a guinea pig, and it seemed to work. But then a guinea pig can't tell you anything, and you can't explain to it how to come back. "Look here, Uncle Andrew," said Diggory. "It really is dinner time, and they'll be looking for us in a moment. You must let us out." "Must?" said Uncle Andrew. Diggory and Polly glanced at one another. They dared not say anything, but the glances meant, "Is this dreadful?" and "We must humor him." "If you let us go out for our dinner now," said Polly, "we can come back after dinner." "Ah, but how would I know that you would?" said Uncle Andrew with a cunning smile. Then he seemed to change his mind. "Well, well," he said, "if you really must go, I suppose you must. I can't expect two youngsters like you to find fun talking to an old buffer like me." He sighed and went on, "You have no idea how lonely I sometimes am. But no matter, go to your dinner. But I must give you a present before you go. It's not every day that I see a little girl in my dingy old study, especially, if I may say so, such a very attractive young lady as yourself." Polly began to think he might not really be mad at all. "Wouldn't you like a ring, my dear?" said Uncle Andrew to Polly. "Do you mean to give us one of those yellow or green ones?" said Polly. "How lovely!" "Not a green one," said Uncle Andrew. "I'm afraid I can't give the green ones away. But I'd be delighted to give you any of the yellow ones with my love. Come and try one on." Polly had now quite got over her fright, and felt sure that the old gentleman was not mad, and there was certainly something strangely attractive about those bright rings. She moved over to the tray. "Why, I declare," she said, "that humming noise gets louder here. It's almost as if the rings are making it." "What a funny fancy, my dear," said Uncle Andrew with a laugh. It sounded a very natural laugh, but Diggory had seen an eager, almost greedy look in his face. "Polly, don't be a fool," he shouted. "Don't touch them." It was too late. Exactly as he spoke, Polly's hand went out to touch one of the rings, and immediately, without a flash or a noise or a warning of any sort, there was no Polly. Diggory and his uncle were alone in the room. Chapter 2. Diggory and his uncle. It was so sudden and so horribly unlike anything that had ever happened to Diggory, even in a nightmare, that he let out a scream. Instantly, Uncle Andrew's hand was over his mouth. "None of that," he hissed in Diggory's ear. "If you start making noise, your mother will hear it. You know what a fright might do to her." Oh, his mom's sick here. Sorry, I thought she was elsewhere. My bad. "If you start making noise, your mother will hear it, and you know what a fright might do to her." As Diggory said afterwards, the horrible meanness of getting at a chap. One second. I'm sorry, I gotta pause this. I'm smelling something. Sorry about that. Okay, now I can concentrate. I was just worried something in the oven was burning. Okay, so. Your mother will hear it. As Diggory said afterwards, the horrible meanness of getting at a chap in that way almost made him sick. But of course he didn't scream again. "That's better," said Uncle Andrew. "Perhaps you couldn't help it. It is a shock when you first see someone vanish. Why, it gave even me a turn when the guinea pig did it the other night." "Is that why you yelled?" asked Diggory. "Oh, you heard that, did you? Hope you haven't been spying on me." No, I haven't, said Diggory indignantly. But what happened to Polly? Congratulate me, my dear boy, said Uncle Andrew, rubbing his hands. My experiment has succeeded. The little girl's gone, vanished right out of this world. What have you done to her? Sent her to, well, to another place. What do you mean? Asked Diggory. Uncle Andrew sat down and said, Well, I'll tell you all about it. Have you ever heard of old Miss LeFay? Wasn't she a great aunt or something? Said Diggory. Not exactly, said Uncle Andrew. She was my godmother. That's her there on the wall. Diggory looked and saw a faded photograph. It showed the face of an old woman in a bonnet, and he could now remember that he had once seen a photo of the same face in an old drawer at home in the country. He had asked his mother who it was, and Mother had not seemed to want to talk about the subject much. It was not at all a nice face, Diggory thought, though of course with those early photographs one could never really tell. Wasn't there something wrong about her, Uncle Andrew? He asked. Well, said Uncle Andrew with a chuckle, it depends what you call wrong. People are so narrow-minded. She certainly got very queer in later life. Did very unwise things. That was why they shut her up. In an asylum, do you mean? Oh, no, said Uncle Andrew in a shocked voice. Nothing of that sort. Only in prison. I say, said Diggory, what had she done? Ah, poor woman, said Uncle Andrew. She had been very unwise. There were a good many different things. We needn't go into all that. She was always very kind to me. But look here, what has this all got to do with Polly? I do wish you'd... All in good time, my boy, said Uncle Andrew. They let old Miss LeFay out before she died, and I was one of the very few people with whom she allowed to see her in her last illness. She had got to dislike ordinary, ignorant people, you understand. I do myself. But she and I were interested in the same sort of things. It was only a few days before her death that she told me to go to an old bureau in her house and open a secret drawer and bring her a little box that I would find there. The moment I picked it up, that box, I could tell by the prickling in my fingers I held some great secret in my hands. She gave it to me and made me promise that as soon as she was dead I would burn it, unopened, with certain ceremonies. That promise I did not keep. Well then, it was jolly rotten of you, said Diggory. Rotten, said Uncle Andrew with a puzzled look. Oh, I see. You mean little boys ought to keep their promises. Very true. Most right and proper, I'm sure. I'm very glad you have been taught to do it. But of course you must understand that rules of the sort, however excellent they may be for little boys and servants and women, and even people in general, can't possibly be expected to apply to profound students and great thinkers and sages. No, Diggory, men like me, who possess hidden wisdom, are freed from such common rules, just as we are cut off from common pleasures. Ours, my boy, is a high and lonely destiny. As he said this, he sighed and looked so grave and noble and mysterious that for a second Diggory really thought he was saying something rather fine. But then he remembered the ugly look he had seen on his uncle's face the moment before Polly had vanished, and all at once he saw through Uncle Andrew's grand words. All it means, he said to himself, is that he thinks he can do anything he likes to get anything he wants. Of course, said Uncle Andrew, I don't dare to open the box for a long time, for I knew it might contain something highly dangerous. My godmother was a very remarkable woman. The truth is, she was one of the last mortals in this country who had fairy blood in her. She said there had been two others in her time. One was a duchess, and the other a chairwoman. In fact, Diggory, you are now talking to the last man, possibly, who really had a fairy godmother. There, that'll be something for you to remember when you're an old man yourself. I bet she was a bad fairy, thought Diggory, and added out loud, But what about Polly? How you do harp on that, said Uncle Andrew, as if that was what mattered. My first task was, of course, to study the box itself. It was very ancient, and I knew enough even then to know that it wasn't Greek or Old Egyptian or Babylonian or Hittite or Chinese. It was older than any of those nations. Ah, that was a great day when I at last found out the truth. The box was Atlantean. It came from the lost island of Atlantis. That meant it was centuries older than any of the Stone Age things they dig up in Europe. And it wasn't a rough, crude thing like them either, for in the very dawn of time, Atlantis was already a great city with places and temples and learned men. He paused for a moment, as if he expected Diggory to say something, But Diggory was disliking his uncle more every minute, so he said nothing. Meanwhile, continued Uncle Andrew, I was learning a good deal in other ways. It wouldn't be proper to explain them to a child, about magic in general. That meant that I came to have a fair idea of what sort of things might be in the box. By various tests, I narrowed down the possibilities. I had to get to know some devilish queer people and go through some very disagreeable experiences. That was what turned my head gray. One doesn't become a magician for nothing. My health broke down in the end, but I got better. And at last I actually knew. Although there was not really the least chance of anyone overhearing them, he leaned forward and almost whispered as he said, "The Atlantean box contains something that had been brought from another world when our world was only just beginning." "What?" asked Diggory, who was now interested in spite of himself. "Only dust," said Uncle Andrew. "Fine, dry dust. Nothing much to look at. Not much to show for a lifetime of toil, you might say. But when I looked at that dust, I took jolly good care not to touch it, and thought that every grain had once been in another world. I don't mean another planet, you know. They're part of our world, and you could get to them if you went far enough. But a really other world. Another nature, another universe, somewhere you would never reach even if you traveled through the space of this universe forever and ever. A world that could be reached only by magic. Well," here Uncle Andrew rubbed his hands till his knuckles cracked like fireworks. "I knew," he went on, "that if only you could get it into the right form, that dust would draw you back to the place it had come from. But the difficulty was to get it into the right form. My earlier experiments were all failures. I tried them on guinea pigs. Some of them only died. Some exploded like little bombs." "It was a jolly cruel thing to do," said Diggory, who had once had a guinea pig of his own. "How you do keep getting off the point," said Uncle Andrew. "That's what the creatures were for. I'd bought them myself. Let me see. Where was I? Yes. At last I succeeded in making the rings, the yellow rings. But now a new difficulty arose. I was pretty sure now that a yellow ring would send any creature that touched it into the other place. But what would be the good of that if I couldn't get them back to take me where they had found, to tell me what they had found there?" "And what about them?" said Diggory. "A nice mess this would be, and if they couldn't get back." "You will keep on looking at everything from the wrong point of view," said Uncle Andrew, with a look of impatience. "Can't you understand that the thing is a great experiment? The whole point of sending anyone into the other place is that I want to find out what it's like." "Well, why don't you go there yourself, then?" Diggory had hardly ever seen anyone look so surprised and offended as his uncle did at this simple question. "Me? Me?" he exclaimed. "The boy must be mad. A man at my time of life and in my state of health to risk the shock and the dangers of being flung suddenly into a different universe. I never heard anything so preposterous in my life. Do you realize what you're saying? Think what another world means. You might meet anything. "And I suppose you've sent Polly into it, then," said Diggory. His cheeks were flaming with anger now. "And all I can say," he added, "even if you are my uncle, is that you've behaved like a coward, sending a girl to a place you're afraid to go yourself." "Silence, sir," said Uncle Andrew, bringing his hand down on the table. "I will not be talked to like that by a little dirty schoolboy. You don't understand. I am the great scholar, the magician, the adept, who is doing the experiments. Of course, I need subjects to do it on. Bless my soul, you'll be telling me next I ought to have asked the guinea pigs' permission before I used them. No great wisdom can be reached without sacrifice, but the idea of my going myself is ridiculous. It's like asking a general to fight as a common soldier. Supposing I got killed, what would become of my life's work?" "Oh, do stop jawing," said Diggory. "Are you going to bring Polly back?" "I was going to tell you when you so rudely interrupted me," said Uncle Andrew, "that I did, at last, find a way of doing the return journey. The green rings draw you back." "But Polly hasn't got a green ring." "No," said Uncle Andrew with a cruel smile. "Then she can't get back," shouted Diggory, "and it is exactly the same as you'd murdered her." "She can get back," said Uncle Andrew, "if someone else will go after her wearing a yellow ring himself, and taking 2 green rings, one to bring himself back, and one to bring her back." Now, of course, Diggory saw the trap in which he was caught, and he stared at Uncle Andrew, saying nothing, with his mouth wide open. His cheeks had gone very pale. "I hope," said Uncle Andrew presently in a very high and mighty voice, just as if he were a perfect uncle who had given one won a handsome tip and some good advice. I hope, Diggory, you are not given to showing the white feather. I should be very sorry to think that anyone of our family had not enough honor and chivalry to go to the aid of a lady in distress. Oh, shut up, said Diggory. If you had any honor after that, you'd be going yourself, but I know you won't. All right, I see I've got to go. You are a beast. I suppose you planned this whole thing so that she'd go without knowing it, and that I'd have to go after her. Of course, said Uncle Andrew with his hateful smile. Very well, I'll go. But there's one thing I jolly well mean to say first. I didn't believe in magic till today. I see now it's real. Well, if it is, I suppose all the other fairy tales are more or less true. You're simply a wicked, cruel magician like the ones in the stories. Well, I've never read a story in which people of that sort weren't paid out in the end, and I bet you will be. It serves you right. Of all the things Diggory had said, this was the first that really went home. Uncle Andrew started, and there came out of his face a look of such horror that, beast though he was, you could almost feel sorry for him. But a second later, he smoothed it all away and said with a rather forced laugh, Well, I suppose that is a natural thing for a child to think, brought up among women as you have been. Old wives' tales, eh? I don't think you need to worry about my danger, Diggory. Wouldn't it be better to worry about the danger of your little friend? She's been gone some time. If there are any dangers over there, well, it would be a pity to arrive a moment too late. A lot you care, said Diggory fiercely, but I'm sick of this jaw. What have I got to do? You really must learn to control your temper of yours, my boy, said Uncle Andrew coolly. Otherwise you'll grow up like your Aunt Letty now. Attend to me. He got up, put on a pair of gloves, and walked over to the tray that had contained the rings. They only work, he said, if they actually touching your skin. Wearing gloves, I can pick them up like this, and nothing happens. If you carried one in your pocket, nothing would happen. But of course, you'd have to be careful not to put your hand in your pocket and touch it by accident. The moment you touch a yellow ring, you vanish out of this world. When you are in the other place, I expect, of course, this hasn't been tested yet, but I expect that the moment you touch the green ring, you vanish out of that world and, I expect, reappear in this. Now, I take these 2 greens and drop them into your right-hand pocket. Remember very carefully which pocket the greens are in. G for green and R for right. G, R, you see, which are the very first 2 letters of green. One for you and one for the little girl. Now, you pick up a yellow one for yourself. I should put it on your finger if I were you. There'll be less chance of dropping it. Diggory had almost picked up the yellow ring when he suddenly checked himself. Look here, he said. What about Mother? Supposing she asks where I am? The sooner you go, the sooner you'll be back, said Uncle Andrew cheerfully. But you don't really know whether I can get back. Uncle Andrew shrugged his shoulders, walked across to the door, unlocked it, and threw it open and said, Oh, very well then, just as you please. Go down and have your dinner. Leave the little girl to be eaten by wild animals, or drowned, or starved in other world, or lost there for good, if that's what you'd prefer. It's all one to me. Perhaps before tea time, you'd better drop in on Mrs. Plummer and explain that she'll never see her daughter again, because you were afraid to put on a ring. By gum, said Diggory, don't I just wish I was big enough to punch your head. Then he buttoned up his coat, took a deep breath, and picked up the ring, and he thought then, as he'd always thought afterwards too, that he could not decently have done anything else. Good, take a drink. If I remember correctly, these are fairly young children. Like, I think they tell us later, close to 5 to 7 years old. And he's pulling this. I'm like, dude. Chapter 3. The Wood Between Worlds. Uncle Andrew and his study vanished instantly. Then, for a moment, everything became muddled. The next thing Diggory knew was there was a soft green light coming down on him from above, and darkness below. He didn't seem to be standing on anything, or sitting, or lying. Nothing appeared to be touching him. I believe I'm in water, said Diggory. Or underwater. This frightened him for a second, but almost at once he could feel that he was rushing upwards. Then his head suddenly came out into the air, and he found himself scrambling ashore and onto the smooth, grassy ground at the edge of a pool. As he rose to his feet, he noticed that he was neither dripping nor panting for breath, as anyone would expect after being underwater. His clothes were perfectly dry. He was standing by the edge of a small pool, no more than 10 feet from the side to side, in a wood. The trees grew close together and were so leafy that he could get no glimpse of the sky. All the light was green light that came through the leaves, that there must have been a very strong sun overhead, for this green daylight was bright and warm. It was the quietest wood you could possibly imagine. There were no birds, no insects, no animals, and no wind. You could almost feel the trees growing. The pool he had just got out of was not the only pool. There were dozens of others, a pool every few yards as far as his eyes could reach. You could almost feel the trees drinking the water up with their roots. This wood was very much alive. When he tried to describe it afterwards, Diggory always said it was a rich place, as rich as plum cake. The strangest thing was that, almost before he had looked about him, Diggory had half forgotten how he had come there. At any rate, he was certainly not thinking about Polly, or Uncle Andrew, or even his mother. He was not in the least frightened, or excited, or curious. If anyone had asked him, "Where did you come from?" he would probably have said, "I've always been here." That was what it felt like, as if one had always been in that place, and never been bored, although nothing had ever happened. As he said long afterwards, it's not the sort of place where things happen. The trees go on growing, that's all. After Diggory had looked at the woods for a long time, he noticed that there was a girl lying on her back at the foot of a tree a few yards away. Her eyes were nearly shut, but not quite, as if she were just between sleeping and waking. So he looked at her for a long time and said nothing, and at last she opened her eyes and looked at him for a long time, and she also said nothing. Then she spoke in a dreamy, contented sort of voice. "I think I've seen you before," she said. "I rather think so too," said Diggory. "Have you been here long?" "Oh, always," said the girl. "At least, I don't know. A very long time." "So have I," said Diggory. "No, you haven't," she said. "I've just seen you come up out of that pool." "Yes, I suppose I did," said Diggory with a puzzled air. "I'd forgotten." Then for quite a long time neither said any more. "Look here," said the girl presently. "I wonder, did we ever really meet before? I had a sort of idea, a sort of picture in my head, of a boy and a girl like us, living somewhere quite different, doing all sorts of things. Perhaps it was only a dream." "I've had the same dream, I think," said Diggory, "about a boy and a girl living next door, and something about crawling along rafters. I remember the girl had a dirty face." "Aren't you getting it mixed? In my dream, it was the boy who had the dirty face." "Can't remember the boy's face," said Diggory, and then added, "Hello, why's that?" Hello, what's that?" "Why, it's a guinea pig," said the girl, and it was, a fat guinea pig nosing about in the grass. But around the middle of the guinea pig there ran tape, and tied to it by the tape was a bright yellow ring. Look, cried Diggory. "The ring, and look! You've got one on your finger, and so have I." The girl now sat up, really interested at last. They stared very hard at one another, trying to remember, and then, at exactly the same moment, she shouted out, "Mr. Ketterly!" and he shouted out, "Uncle Andrew!" And they knew who they were and began to remember the whole story. After a few minutes' hard talking, they had got it straight. Diggory explained how beastly Uncle Andrew had been. "What do we do now?" said Polly. "Take the guinea pig and go home?" "There's no hurry," said Diggory with a huge yawn. "I think there is," said Polly. "This place is too quiet. It's so dreamy. We're almost asleep. If we once give in to it, we shall lie down and drowse forever and ever." "It's very nice here," said Diggory. "Yes, it is," said Polly. "But we've got to get back." She stood up and began to go cautiously towards the guinea pig. And then she changed her mind. "We might as well leave the guinea pig," she said. "It's perfectly happy here, and your uncle will only do something horrid to it if we take it home." "I bet he would," answered Diggory. "Look at what he's treated us. Look at the way he's treated us. By the way, how do we get home?" "Go back into the pool, I expect." They came and stood together at the edge, looking down into the smooth water. It was full of the reflections of the green, leafy branches. They made it look very deep. "We haven't any bathing things," said Polly. "We shan't need them, silly," said Diggory. we're going in and with our clothes on. We're going in with our clothes on. Don't you remember? It didn't wet us on the way up. Can you swim? A bit. Can you? Well, not much. I don't think we shall need to swim, said Dickory. We want to go down, don't we? Neither of them very much liked the idea of jumping into the pool, but neither of them said so to the other. They took hands and 1, 2, 3, go! And jumped. There was a great splash, and of course they closed their eyes, but when they opened them again they found that they were still standing, hand in hand, in the green wood, and hardly up to their ankles in water. The pool was apparently only a couple of inches deep. They splashed back onto the dry ground. What on earth's gone wrong? Said Polly in a frightened voice, but not quite so frightened as you might expect, because it is hard to feel really frightened in that wood. The place was too peaceful. Oh, I know, said Dickory. Of course it won't work. We're still wearing our yellow rings. They're for the outward journey, They're for the outward journey, you know. The green ones take you home. We must change rings. Have you got pockets? Good. Put your yellow ring in your left. I've got 2 greens. Here's one for you. They put on their green rings and came back to the pool. Before they tried another jump, Dickory gave a long, "Oh! What's the matter?" said Polly. "I've just had a really wonderful idea," said Dickory. "What are all the other pools?" "What do you mean?" "Why, if we can get back to our world by jumping into this pool, mightn't we get somewhere else by jumping into one of the others? Supposing there was a world at the bottom of every pool." "But I thought we were already in your Uncle Andrew's other world, or other place, whatever he called it. Didn't you say—" "Oh, bother Uncle Andrew," interrupted Dickory. "I don't believe he knows anything about it. He never had the pluck to come here himself. He only talked to me of one other world. But suppose there were dozens." "You mean this wood might be only one of them?" "No, I don't believe this wood is a world at all. I think it's just a sort of in-between place." Polly looked puzzled. "Don't you see?" said Dickory. "No, do listen. Think of our tunnel under the slates at home. Isn't it a room? It isn't a room in any... What? Oh, I'm gonna put a pause. Oh, I got interrupted. It's okay. I'll resume reading then. Okay. In a way, it isn't really part of any of the houses, but once you're in the tunnel, you can go along it and come into any of the houses in the row. Mightn't this wood be the same? A place that isn't in any of the worlds, but once you've found that place, you can get into them all? Well, even if you can, began Polly, but Dickory went on as if he hadn't heard her. And of course, that explains everything, he said. That's why it's so quiet and sleepy here. Nothing really happens here. Like at home. It's in the houses that people talk and do things and have meals. Nothing goes on in in-between places, behind the walls and above the ceiling and under the floor, or in any of our own tunnel. But when you come out of our tunnel, you may find yourself in any house. I think we can get out of this place into jolly well anywhere. We don't need to jump back into the same pool we came up by. Or not just yet." "The wood between the worlds," said Polly dreamily. "It sounds rather nice." "Come on," said Dickory. "Which pool shall we try?" "Look here," said Polly. "I'm not going to try any new pool till we've made sure we can get back to the old one. We're not even sure if it'll work yet." Yes, said Dickory. "And get caught by Uncle Andrew, and have our rings taken away before we've had any fun? No thanks." "Couldn't we just go part of the way down into our own pool?" said Polly. "Just to see if it works. And then if it does, we'll change rings and come up again before we're really back in Mr. Ketterly's study." "Can we go part of the way down?" "Well, it took time coming up. I suppose it'll take a little time going back." Dickory made rather a fuss about agreeing to this, but he had to in the end, because Polly absolutely refused to do any exploring in new worlds unless she had made sure about getting back to the old one. She was quite as brave as he was about some dangers, wasps for instance, but she was not so interested in finding out things nobody had ever heard about before. For Dickory was the sort of person who wants to know everything, and when he grew up he became the famous Professor Kirk who comes into other books. After a great deal of arguing, they agreed to put on their green rings. "Green for safety," said Dickory, "so you can't help remembering which is which, and hold hands and jump." But as soon as they seemed to be getting back to Uncle Andrew's study, or even to their own world, Polly was to shout, "Change," and then they would slip off their rings and put on their yellow ones. Diggory wanted to be the one who shouted, "Change," but Polly wouldn't agree. They put on the green rings, took hands, and once more shouted, "1, 2, 3, go!" This time it worked. It is very hard to tell you what it felt like, for everything happened so quickly. At first there was bright lights moving about in a black sky. Diggory always thinks these were stars, or even swears that he saw Jupiter quite close enough to see its moon. But almost at once there were rows and rows of roofs and chimney pots about them. And they could see St. Paul's and knew they were looking at London. But you could see through the walls of all the houses. Then they could see Uncle Andrew, very vague and shadowy, but getting clearer and more solid looking all the time, just as if he were coming into focus. But before he became quite real, Polly shouted, "Change!" And they did change, and our world faded away like a dream, and the green lights above grew stronger and stronger till their heads came out of the pool, and they scrambled ashore. And there was the woods all about them, all as green and bright and still as ever. The whole thing had taken less than a minute. "There," Diggory said. "That's all right. Now for the adventure. Any pool will do. Come on, let's try that one." "Stop," said Polly. "Aren't we going to mark this pool?" They stared at each other and turned quite white as they realized the dreadful thing that Diggory had just been going to do. For there were any number of pools in the wood, and the pools were all alike, and the trees were all alike, so that if they had once left behind the pool that led to our own world without making some sort of landmark, the chances would have been 100 to 1 against them ever finding it again. Diggory's hand was shaking as he opened his penknife and cut out a long strip of turf along the bank of the pool. The soil, which smelled nice, was of a rich reddish brown and showed up well against the green. It's an odd color. Sorry, that's me. It's a good thing one of us has some sense, said Polly. Well, don't keep on gassing about it, said Diggory. Come along, I want to see what's in one of the other pools. And Polly gave him a pretty sharp answer. He said something even nastier in reply. The quarrel lasted for several minutes, but it would be dull to write it all down. Let us skip to the moment in which they stood with beating hearts and rather scared faces on the edge of the unknown pool, with their yellow rings on, and held hands, and once more said, 1, 2, 3, go! Splash. Once again, it hadn't worked. This pool, too, appeared to be only a puddle. Instead of reaching a new world, they only got their feet wet and splashed their legs for a second time that morning. If it was morning, it seemed always the same time in the woods between the worlds. Blast and botheration! Exclaimed Diggory. What's going on wrong now? We've put our yellow rings on all right. We said yellow for the outward journey. Now the truth was that Uncle Andrew, who knew nothing about the woods between the worlds, had quite a wrong idea about the rings. The yellow ones weren't outward rings, and the green ones weren't homeward rings, at least not in the way he thought. The stuff of which both were made had all come from the wood. The stuff in the yellow rings had the power of drawing you into the wood. It was the stuff that wanted to get back to its own place, the in-between place. But the stuff in the green rings is stuff that is trying to get out of its own place, so that the green ring would take you out of the wood into a world. Uncle Andrew, you see, was working with things he did not really understand. Most magicians are. Of course, Diggory did not realize the truth quite clearly either, or not till later. But when they had talked it over, they decided to try their green rings on the new pool, just to see what happened. I'm game if you are, said Polly, but she really said this because in her heart of hearts she now felt sure that neither kind of ring was going to work at all in the new pool, and so there was nothing worse to be afraid of than another splash. I'm not quite sure that Diggory had not the same feeling. At any rate, when they had both put on their greens and come back to the edge of the water and taken hands again, they were certainly a good deal more cheerful and less solemn than they had been in the first time. 1, 2, 3, go, said Diggory, and they jumped. Take a drink. Chapter 4. The Bell and the Hammer. There was no doubt about the magic this time. Down and down they rushed, first through the darkness, and then through a mass of vague and whirling shapes, which might have been almost anything. It grew lighter, then suddenly they felt that they were standing on something solid. A moment later, everything came into focus, and they were able to look about them. "What a queer place," said Diggory. "I don't like it," said Polly, with something like a shudder. What they noticed first was the light. It wasn't like sunlight, and it wasn't like electric light, or lamps, or candles, or any other light they had ever seen. It was dull, rather red light, not at all cheerful. It was steady and did not flicker. They were standing on a flat, paved surface, and buildings rose all around them. There was no roof overhead. They were in a sort of courtyard. The sky was extraordinarily dark, a blue that was almost black. When you had seen that sky, you wondered that there should be any light at all. "I've a very funny weather here. It's very funny weather here," said Diggory. "I wonder if we've arrived just in time for a thunderstorm or an eclipse." "I don't like it," said Polly. Both of them, without quite knowing why, were talking in whispers, as though there was no reason why they should go on holding hands after their jump, they didn't let go. The walls rose very high all round the courtyard. They had many great windows in them, windows without glass, through which you saw nothing but black darkness. Lower down, there were great pillared arches, yawning blackly like the mouths of railway tunnels. It was rather cold. The stone of which everything was built seemed to be red, but that might only have been because of the curious light. It was obviously very old. Many of the flat stones that paved the courtyard had cracks across them. None of them fitted closely together, and the sharp corners were all worn off. One of the arched doorways was half filled up with rubble. The two children kept on turning around and round to look at the different sides of the courtyard. One reason was that they were afraid of somebody or something looking out of those windows at them when their backs were turned. "Do you think anyone lives here?" said Diggory at last, still in a whisper. "No," said Polly. "It's all in ruins. We haven't heard a sound since we came." "Let's stand still and listen for a bit," suggested Diggory. They stood still and listened, but all they could hear was the thump-thump of their own hearts. This place was at least as quiet as the wood between worlds, but it was a different kind of quietness. The silence of the wood had been rich and warm. You could almost hear the trees growing, and full of life. This was dead, cold, empty silence. You couldn't imagine anything growing in it. "Let's go home," said Polly. "But we haven't seen anything yet," said Diggory. "Now we're here, we simply must have a look around. I'm sure there's nothing at all interesting here." "There's not much point in finding a magic ring that lets you into other worlds if you're afraid to look at them when you're got there." "I was talking about being afraid," said Polly, letting go of Diggory's hand. I only thought you didn't seem very keen on exploring this place. I'll go anywhere you go." "We can get away the moment we want to," said Diggory. "Let's take off our green rings and put them in our right-hand pockets. All we've got to do is remember that our yellows are in our left-hand pockets. You can keep your hand as near your pocket as you like, but don't put it in or you'll touch your yellow and vanish." They did this, and went quietly up to one of the big arched doorways which led into the inside of the building. And when they stood on the threshold and could look in, they saw it was not so dark inside. Hold on a second. Sorry, pause. Oh, sorry about that. We're hearing noises. It was slightly throwing me off. Seen anything? Exploring. Okay. So, touch your yellow rings and vanish. They did this and went quietly up to one of the big arched doorways which led into the inside of the building. And when they stood on the threshold and could look in, they saw it was not so dark inside as they had thought at first. It led into a vast, shadowy hall which appeared to be empty, but on the far side there was a row of pillars with arches between them, and through those arches there streamed in some more of the same tired-looking light. They crossed the hall, walking very carefully for fear of holes in the floor or anything lying about that they might trip over. It seemed a long walk. When When they had reached the other side, they came out through the arches and found themselves in another and larger courtyard. "This doesn't look very safe," said Polly, pointing at a place where the wall bulged outwards and looked as if it were ready to fall over into the courtyard. In one place, a pillar was missing between two arches, and the bit that came down to where the top of the pillar ought to have been hung there was nothing to support it. Clearly, the place had been deserted for hundreds, perhaps thousands of years. "If it's lasted till now, I suppose it'll last a bit longer," said Diggory, "but we must be very quiet. You know a noise sometimes brings things down, like an avalanche in the Alps." They went on out of that courtyard into another doorway, and up a great flight of steps, and through the vast rooms that opened out one after another till you were dizzy with the mere size of the place. Every now and then they thought they were going to get out into the open and see what sort of country lay around the enormous place, but each time they only got into another courtyard. They must have been magnificent places when the people were still living there. In one there had once been a fountain. A great stone monster with widespread wings stood with its mouth open, and you could see a bit of piping at the back of its mouth, out of which the water used to pour. Under it was a wide stone basin to hold the water, but it was as dry as a bone. In other places there were the dry sticks of some sort of climbing plant, which had wound itself around the pillars and helped to pull some of them down, but it had died long ago. And there were... Oh, does that mean the ad's happening? Time to mute my thing and to pick up the other book for the short story while the ad is happening, so that we don't miss stuff. So, short stories from Through the Fairy Halls. So, Clyde Rowland and the Goblin King, an English folktale. Once there was a youth named Roland, who, being of noble birth, was called by the title of Clyde, as were all sons of the nobility. Now Clyde Rowland had 2 brothers and a beautiful sister, Bird Ellen. One day all 3 brothers and their sister were playing ball on the fine green lawn between the castle and the churchyard. At last, Clyde Rowland, who was the youngest of the brothers, kicked the ball with his foot and caught it with his knee, and tossed it so high in the air that it flew up over the church tower. Laughing, Bird Ellen chased it around the church she ran. Chatting gaily and fearing nothing, the brothers waited for the sister to bring back the ball, but she did not return. At last they grew anxious and looked for her all around the church, but she had vanished. They could not find her, so in great distress they sought her through all the land, and still she was nowhere to be found. Then the brothers and their mother grieved greatly, and since the maiden's father was dead, the eldest brother went to ask Merlin, the old wise man and magician, if he knew where Bird Helen was. "Wherever she is, I'll find her and bring her back," the youth vowed. Wherever she is, I'll find her and bring her back, the youth vowed. "That's easier said than done," the white-bearded old wise man said, "for alas, the poor maid must have gone round the church wider shins, which is to say from west to east, contrary to the way the sun goes. If that be true, she was carried off by the king of Elfland, the most malicious, the most dreaded of all the goblins who ever troubled the world, and she is now a prisoner in his dark tower. To bring her back from there would take the boldest knight in Christendom." "I'll save her, or die in the attempt," the brother cried. So Merlin told him what he should do in the dark land of evil goblins, and the eldest brother set out for Elfland. Then his brothers and his mother waited for him to return. Long they waited, and longer still, and every day their doubt, their sorrow, their fear lest he had met calamity deepened. So the second son went to Merlin and asked the same questions as his brother had. Then he too set out to find Bird Ellen. Again, the mother and her youngest son, Clyde Rowland, waited. Longer and longer still they waited, with growing doubt and sorrow. But this brother also failed to return. So Clyde, what's wrong?
I think I'm just saying what you're reading.
This one.
Okay.
You okay?
Yep.
Waited longer and longer still they waited, with growing doubt and sorrow. But this brother also failed to return. So Clyde Rowland asked his mother, the queen, to let him go. But at first she would not, for he was the last of her children. However, he begged and begged, till at last she let him go. And she gave him his father's good sword, that had never struck in vain, Then Clyde Rowland said goodbye to his mother. Goodbye to his mother, going to the cave of Merlin. He too asked the necessary questions. Well, son, said Merlin, you have only 2 things to remember. It's simple as they seem, they're very hard to do. First, you must remember that everyone in Elfland, no matter how pleasant and kind he may appear, is a goblin, an evil enchanter. So if anyone speaks to you there, you must out with your sword and off with his head. The second thing, which you must not forget, is this. In Elfland, you must eat no bite and drink no drop, no matter how hungry or thirsty you may be. For if you should either eat or drink, you will never see Middle-earth again. Nothing daunted, Clyde Rowland thanked Merlin, and off he went on his way. Far, far and afar he journeyed. Then at last he saw a horse herd tending to some old coal-black horses, and the horses had fiery eyes that shot forth sparks of flame. My goodness. Sparks and flame. So Clyde Rowland knew that he was now in the dark realms of Elfland. Canst thou tell me, he asked the horseherd, where the king of Elfland's dark tower is? I cannot tell thee. The horseherd smirked an ugly attempt to look pleasant. But go on a little farther, and thou wilt come to the cowherd. Mayhap he can tell thee. Then, without another word, Clyde Rowland drew the good sword that had never struck in vain, and off went the horseherd's head, with the smirk still on his lips. What the hell? From there the youth went on till he came to the cowherd, of whom he had asked the same question. I cannot tell thee, the cowherd smirked also, but go on to the henwife. She is sure to know. Then Clyde Rowland outs with his sword, and off goes the cowherd's head. After that, he went to the ugly old henwife, in answer to his question. I'm sorry. There's somebody walking around town asking questions and just beheading people. I feel like word would get around, and someone's gonna be like, not answering. In answer to his question, he took him to the edge of the woods and said, Dear lad, from here thou canst see the dark tower on top of yonder green hill that rises up in terraced steps. If thou wouldst enter the tower, go round it windershins 3 times, and each time say, open door, let me come in. Well, Clyde Rowland had no mind to cut off an old woman's head, but now he saw her eyes grow as fiery as those of the horses. Then he knew that she too was a goblin, gladly sending him on to that frowning, threatening tower in the hopes that he might never leave it alive. So he outs with his sword and offs with her head. Then he went on till he came to the tower. 3 times he went round it, windershins, saying each time, open door, let me come in. And the 3rd time the door did open, but when Clyde Rowland went in, it closed with a click. And he found himself in the dark. By and by he saw that he was not in an actual darkness, but in a kind of twilight. For though the place had neither windows nor candles, its walls were made of transparent rock, encrusted with silver and bright stones. So he went down this passage till he came to 2 tall, wide folding doors. They're back? How long is this short story? I will pause, I guess, the short story till the next ad. I get D&D vibes from that. Like, the adventure is just like, to hell with the NPCs, kill them. What's up?
I thought I found it online. I was gonna send it.
Oh, there's more than one of these books.
Yep.
Weirdly enough, the books kind of feel like knockoffs. Like, they mentioned Middle-earth, Merlin, and what did I say? His name was Clyde something? Sorry. We will now resume our regular programming. Oh. Dry sticks of some sort climbing plant, which had wound itself round the pillars and helped to pull some of them down, but it had died long ago, and there were no ants or spiders, or any of the other living things you'd expect to see in a ruin, and where the dry earth showed between the broken flagstones, there was no grass or moss. It was all so dreary, and all so much the same, that even Diggory was thinking they had better put on their yellow rings and get back to the warm green living forest of the in-between place, when they came to 2 huge doors of some metal that might possibly be gold. One stood a little ajar, so of course they went to look in. Both started back and drew a long breath, for here, at last, was something worth seeing. For a second, they thought the room was full of people, hundreds of people, all seated and all perfectly still. Polly and Diggory, as you may guess, stood perfectly still themselves for a good long time looking in. But presently they decided that what they were looking at could not be real people. There was not a movement nor the sound of a breath amongst them all. They were all like the most wonderful waxworks you ever saw. This time, Polly took the lead. There was something in this room which interested her more than it interested Diggory. All the figures were wearing magnificent clothes. If you were interested in clothes at all, you could hardly help going in and see them closer, and the blaze of their colors made this room look not exactly cheerful, but at any rate rich and majestic after all the dust and emptiness of the others. It had more windows, too, and was a good deal lighter. I can hardly describe the clothes. The figures were all robed, and all had crowns on their heads. Their robes were of crimson and silver gray and deep purple and vivid greens, and there were patterns and pictures of flowers and strange beasts and needlework all over them. Precious stones of astonishing size and brightness stared from their crowns and hung in chains round their necks and peeped out from all the places where anything was fastened. "Why haven't these clothes all rotted away long ago?" said Polly. "Magic," whispered Diggory. "Can't you feel it? I bet this whole room is just stiff with enchantments. I could feel it the moment we came in." "Any one of these dresses would cost hundreds of pounds," said Polly, but Diggory was more interested in the faces, and indeed they were well worth looking at. People sat in their stone chairs on each side of the room, and the floor was left free down to the middle. You could walk down and look at the faces in turn. "They were nice people, I think," said Diggory. Polly nodded. All the faces they could see were certainly nice. Both the men and women looked kind and wise, and they seemed to come of a handsome race. But after the children had gone a few steps down the room, they came to faces that looked a little different. These were very solemn faces. You felt you would have to mind your P's and Q's if you ever met living people who looked like that. When they had gone a little further, they found themselves among faces they didn't like. This was about the middle of the room. The faces here looked very strong and proud and happy, but they looked cruel. A little further on, they looked crueler. Further on again, they were still cruel, but they no longer looked happy. They were even despairing faces, as if the people they belonged to had done dreadful things, and had also suffered dreadful things. The last figure of all was the most interesting. A woman even more richly dressed than the others, very tall, but every figure in that room was taller than the people of our world, with a look of such fierceness and pride that it took your breath away. Yet she was beautiful too. Years afterwards, when he was an old man, Diggory said he had never in all of his life known a woman so beautiful. It is only fair to add that Polly always said she couldn't see anything especially beautiful about her. This woman, as I said, was the last, but there were plenty of empty chairs beyond her, as if the room had been intended for a much larger collection of images. I do wish we knew the story that's behind all this. Let's go back and look at that table sort of thing in the middle of the room. The thing in the middle of the room was not exactly a table. It was a square pillar about 4 feet high, and on it there rose a little golden arch, from which there hung a little golden bell. Beside this there lay a little golden hammer to hit the bell with. I wonder, said Diggory. There seems to be something written here, said Polly, stooping down and looking at the side of the pillar. By gum, so there is, said Diggory. But of course we shan't be able to read it. Shan't we? I'm not so sure, said Polly. They both looked at it hard, and as you might have expected, the letters cut in the stone were strange. But now a great wonder happened, for as they looked, though the shape of the strange letters never altered, they found that they could understand them. If only Diggory had remembered what he himself had said a few minutes ago, that this was an enchanted room, he might have guessed that the enchantment was beginning to work. But he was too wild with curiosity to think about that. He was longing more and more to know what was written on the pillar, and very soon they both knew. What it said was something like this, at least this is the sense of it through the poetry. When you read it there, it was better. At least this is the sense of it. Though the poetry when you read it there was better. Make your choice, adventurous stranger. Strike the bell and bide the danger, or wonder till it drives you mad what would have followed if you had. No fear, said Polly. We don't want any danger. Oh, but don't you see it's no good, said Dickory. We can't get out of it now. We shall always be wondering what else would have happened if we had struck the bell. I'm not going home to be driven mad by always thinking of that. No fear. Don't be so silly, said Polly. As if anyone would, what does it matter what would have happened? I expect anyone who's come as far as this, is bound to go on wondering till it sends them dotty. That's the magic of it, you see. I can feel it beginning to work on me already. I don't, said Polly crossly, and I don't believe you do either. You're just putting it on. That's all you know, said Dickory. It's because you're a girl. Girls never want to know anything but gossip and rot about people getting engaged. You look exactly like your uncle when you said that, said Polly. Why can't you keep to the point, said Dickory. What we're talking about is, how exactly like a man, said Polly in a very grown-up voice, but she had added hastily in her real voice. And don't say I'm just like a woman, or you'll be a beastly copycat. I should never dream of calling a kid like you a woman, said Dickory loftily. Oh, I'm a kid, am I? Said Polly, who was now in real rage. Well, you needn't be bothered by having a kid with you any longer then. I'm off. I've had enough of this place, and I've had enough of you too, you beastly stuck-up, obstinate pig. None of that, said Dickory in a voice even nastier than he meant it to be, for he saw Polly's hand moving to her pocket and get a hold of her yellow ring. I can't excuse what he did next, except by saying that he was very sorry for it afterwards, and so were a good many other people. Before Polly's hand reached her pocket, he grabbed her wrist, leaning across with his back against her chest. Then, keeping her other arm out of the way with his other elbow, he leaned forward, picked up the hammer, and struck the golden bell. A light, smart tap. Then he let her go, and they fell apart, staring at each other and breathing hard. Polly was just beginning to cry, not with fear, and not even because he had hurt her wrist quite badly, but with furious anger. Within 2 seconds, however, they had something to think about that drove their own quarrels quite out of their minds. As soon as the bell was struck, it gave out a note, a sweet note, such as you might have expected, but not very long. But instead of dying away again, it went on. And as it went on, it grew louder. Before a minute had passed, it was twice as loud as it had been to begin with. It was soon so loud that if the children had tried to speak, but they weren't thinking of speaking now, they were just standing with their mouths open, they would not have heard one another. Very soon it was so loud that they could not have heard one another even by shouting, and still it grew, all on one note, a continuous sweet sound, though the sweetness had something horrible about it, till all the air in that great room was throbbing with it, and they could feel the stone floor trembling under their feet. Then at last it began to be mixed with another sound, a vague, disastrous noise, which sounded first like the roar of a distant train, and then the crash of a falling tree. They heard something like great weights falling. Finally, with a sudden rush and thunder and a shake that nearly flung them off their feet, about a quarter of the room at one end of the room fell in. Great blocks of masonry fell all around them, and the walls rocked. The noise of the bell stopped. Clouds of dust cleared away. Everything became quiet again. It was never found out whether the fall of the roof was due to magic or whether that unbearably loud sound from the bell just happened to strike the note which was more than those crumbling walls could stand. There, I hope you're satisfied now, panted Polly. Well, it's all over anyway, said Dickory, and both thought it was, but they had never been more mistaken in their lives. Okay. You have a weird old book from the thrift store. What time is it? 10 o'clock. Okay. Chapter 5. The Deplorable Word. The children were facing one another across the pillar where the bell hung, still trembling, though it no longer gave out any note. Suddenly, they heard a soft noise from the end of the room, which was still undamaged. They turned as quick as lightning to see what it was. One of the robed figures, the farthest off one of all, the woman whom Diggory thought so beautiful, was rising from its chair. When she stood up, they realized she was even taller than they had thought. You could see at once not only from her crown and robes, but from the flash of her eyes and the curve of her lips, that she was a great queen. She looked round the room and saw the damage and saw the children, but you could not guess from her face what she thought of either, or whether she was surprised. She came forward with long, swift strides. "Who has awakened me? Who has broken the spell?" she asked. "I think it must have been me," said Diggory. "You!" said the queen, laying her hand on his shoulder, a white, beautiful hand, but Diggory could feel that it was strong as steel pincers. "You! But you are only a child, a common child. Anyone can see at a glance that you have no drop of royal or noble blood in your veins. How did such as you dare to enter this house?" "We've come from another world by magic," said Polly, who thought it was high time the queen took some notice of her as well as of Diggory. "Is this true?" said the queen, still looking at Diggory and not giving Polly even a glance. "Yes, it is," he said. The queen put her other hand under his chin and forced it up so that she could look at his face better. Diggory started to stare back, but as soon had to let his eyes drop. There was something about hers that overpowered him. After she had studied him for well over a minute, she let go of his chin and said, "You are no magician. The mark of it is not on you. You must be only the servant of a magician, or it is on another's magic that you have traveled here." "It was my Uncle Andrew," said Diggory. At that moment, not in the room itself, but from somewhere very close, there came a faint rumbling, then a creaking, and then a roaring of falling masonry, and the floor shook. "There is great peril here," said the queen. "The whole palace is breaking up. If we are not out of it in a few minutes, we shall be buried under the ruin." She spoke as calmly as if she had been merely mentioning the time of day. "Come," she added, and held out a hand to each of the children. Polly, who was disliking the queen and feeling rather sulky, would not have let her hand be taken if she could have helped it. But though the queen spoke so calmly, her movements were as quick as thought. Before Polly knew what was happening, her left hand had been caught up in a hand so much larger and stronger than her own that she could do nothing about it. "This is a terrible woman," thought Polly. "She's strong enough to break my arm with one twist, and now she's got my left hand. I can't get at my yellow ring. And if I tried to stretch across and get my right hand into my left pocket, I mightn't be able to reach it before she asked me what I was doing. Whatever happens, we mustn't let her know about the rings. I do hope Diggory has the sense to keep his mouth shut. I wish I could get a word with him alone." The queen led them out of the hall of images into a long corridor and then through a whole maze of halls and stairs and courtyards. Again and again they heard parts of the great palace collapsing, sometimes quite close to them. At once a huge arch came thundering down only a moment after they had passed through it. The queen was walking quickly. The children had to trot to keep up with her, but she showed no sign of fear. Diggory thought, "She's wonderfully brave and strong. She's what I call a queen. I do hope she's going to tell us the story of this place." She did tell them certain things as they went along. "That is the door to the dungeon," she would say, or "that passage leads to the principal torture chambers," or "This is the old banqueting hall where my great-grandfather bade 700 nobles to a feast and killed them all before they had drunk their fill." They had rebellious thoughts. They came at last into a hall larger and loftier than any they had yet seen. From its size and from the great doors at the far end, Diggory thought that now at last they must be coming to the main entrance. In this he was quite right. Doors were dead black, either ebony or some black metal which is not found in our world. They were fastened with great bars, most of them too high to reach and all too heavy to lift. He wondered how they would get out. The queen let go of his hand and raised her arm. She drew herself up to her full height and stood rigid. Then she said something which they couldn't understand, but it sounded horrid, and made an action as if she were throwing something towards the door, and those high and heavy doors trembled for a second, as if they were made of silk, and then crumbled away so there was nothing left of them but a heap of dust on the threshold. Ooh. I feel like I should say, I can't whistle. Whistle, Diggory. Has your master magician, your uncle, power like mine?" said the queen, firmly, seizing Diggory's hand again. "But I shall know later. In the meantime, remember what you have seen. This is what happens to things and to people who stand in my way." Much more light than they had yet seen in the in that country was pouring in through the now empty doorway, and when the queen led them out through it, they were not surprised to find themselves in the open air. The wind that blew in their faces was cold, yet somehow stale. They were looking from a high terrace, and there was a great landscape out below them. Low down and near the horizon hung a great red sun, far bigger than our sun. Diggory felt at once that it was also older than ours, a sun near the end of its life, weary of looking down upon that world. To the left of the sun, and higher up, there was a single star, big and bright. Those were the only two things to be seen in the dark sky. They made a dismal group, and on the earth, in every direction, as far as the eye could reach, there spread a vast city, in which there was no living thing to be seen. And all the temples, towers, palaces, pyramids, and bridges cast long, disastrous-looking shadows in the light of that withered sun. Once a great river had flowed through the city, but the water had long since vanished, and there was now only a wide ditch of grey dust. "Look well on that which no eyes will ever see again," said the queen. "Such was Charn, the great city of the King of Kings, the wonder of the world, perhaps of all worlds. Does your uncle rule any city as great as this, boy?" "No," said Diggory. He was going to explain that Uncle Andrew didn't rule any cities, but the queen went on. "It is silent now, but I have stood here when the whole air was full of the noises of Charn, the trampling of feet, the creaking of wheels, the cracking of the whips, and the groaning of the slaves, the thunder of chariots, and the sacrificial drums beating in the temples. I have stood here, but that was near the end, when the roar of battle went up from every street, and the river of Charn ran red." She paused and added, "All in one moment, one woman blotted it out forever." "Who?" said Diggory in a faint voice, but he had already guessed the answer. "I," said the queen. "I, Jadis, the last queen, but the queen of the world." The two children stood silent, shivering in the cold wind. "It was my sister's fault," said the queen. "She drove me to it. May the curse of all the powers rest upon her forever. At any moment I was ready to make peace, yes, and to spare her life too, if only she would yield me the throne. But she would not. Her pride has destroyed the whole world. Even after the war had begun, there was a solemn promise that neither side would use magic. But when she broke her promise, what could I do? Fool, as if she did not know what I had more magic than she. She even knew that I had the secret of the deplorable word. Did she think she was always a weakling, that I would not use it?" "What was it?" said Diggory. "That was the secret of secrets," said the Queen Jadis. "It had long been known that the great king of our race, that there was a word which, if spoken with the proper ceremonies, would destroy all living things except the one who spoke it. But the ancient kings were weak and soft-hearted, and bound themselves and all who would come after them with great oaths never even to seek after the knowledge of that word. But I learned it in a secret place, and paid a terrible price to learn it. I did not use it until she forced me to it. I fought to overcome her by every other means. I poured out the blood of my armies like water." "Beast," muttered Polly. "The last great battle," said the queen, "raged for 3 days here in Charn itself. For 3 days I looked down upon it from this very spot. I did not use my power till the last of my soldiers had fallen, and the accursed woman, my sister, at the head of her rebels, was halfway up those great stairs that led up from the city to the terrace. Then I waited till we were so close that we could see one another's faces. She flashed her horrible, wicked eyes upon me and said, 'Victory!' Yes, and I said, 'Victory!' but not yours. Then I spoke the deplorable word. A moment later, I was the only living thing beneath the sun." "But the people," gasped Diggory. "What people, boy?" asked the queen. All the ordinary people, said Polly, "who never done you any harm, and the women and the children and the animals." "Don't you understand?" said the queen, still speaking to Diggory. "I was the queen. They were all my people. What else were they there for but to do my will?" "It was rather hard luck on them all the same," said he. "I had forgotten that you are only a common boy. How should you understand reasons of state? You must learn, child, that what would be wrong for you and for any of the common people is not wrong in a great queen such as I. The weight of the world is on our shoulders. We must be freed from all rules. Ours is a high and lonely destiny. Diggory suddenly remembered that Uncle Andrew had used exactly the same words, but they sounded much grander when Queen Jadis said them, perhaps because Uncle Andrew was not 7 feet tall and dazzlingly beautiful. What did you do then? Said Diggory. I had already cast strong spells on the hall where the images of my ancestors sit, and the force of those spells was that I should sleep among them like an image myself, and need neither food nor fire, though it were 1,000 years till one came and struck the bell and awoke me. Was it the deplorable word that made the sun like that? Asked Diggory. Like what? So big, so red, and so cold. It has always been so, said Jadis, at least for hundreds of thousands of years. Have you a different sort of sun in your world? Yes, it's smaller and yellower, and it gives a good deal more heat. The queen gave a long drawn, ah, and Diggory saw on her face the same hunger and greedy look which he had lately seen on Uncle Andrew's. So, she said, yours is a younger world. She paused for a moment to look once more at the deserted city, and as if she was sorry for all the evil she had done there, she certainly didn't show it, and then said, Now, let us be going. It is cold here at the end of all the ages. Going where? Asked both the children. Where? Repeated Jadis in surprise. To your world, of course. Polly and Diggory looked at each other aghast. Polly had disliked the queen from the very first, and even Diggory, now that he had heard the story, felt that he had seen quite as much of her as he wanted. Certainly she was not all the sort of person one would like to take home, and if they did like, they didn't know how they could. What they wanted was to get away themselves, but Polly couldn't get at her ring, and of course Diggory couldn't go without her. Diggory got very red in the face and stammered, Oh, our world! I didn't know you wanted to go there. What else were you sent here for if not to fetch me? asked Jadis. I'm sure you wouldn't like our world at all, said Diggory. It's not her sort of place, is it, Polly? It's very dull, not worth seeing, really. It will soon be worth seeing when I rule it, answered the queen. Oh, but you can't, said Diggory. It's not like that. They wouldn't let you, you know. The queen gave a contemptuous smile. Many great kings, she said, thought they could stand against the house of Charn, but they all fell, and their very names are forgotten. Foolish boy, do you think that I, with my beauty and my magic, would not have your whole world at my feet before a year is past? Prepare your incantations and take me there at once. This is perfectly frightful, said Diggory to Polly. Perhaps you fear for this uncle of yours, said Jadis. But if he honors me duly, he shall keep his life and his throne. I am not coming to fight against him. He must be a very great magician if he has found out how to send you here. Is he king of your whole world, or only a part? He isn't king of anywhere, said Diggory. You're lying, said the queen. Does not magic always go with the royal blood? Who ever heard of common people being magicians? I can see the truth whether you speak it or not. Your uncle is the great king and the great enchanter of your world, and by his art he has seen the shadow of my face in some magic mirror or some enchanted pool, and for the love of my beauty he has made a potent spell which shook your world to its foundations, and sent you across the very gulf between worlds and worlds to ask my favor and to bring me to him. Answer me, is that not how it is? Well, not exactly, said Diggory. Not exactly, shouted Polly. Why, it's absolute bosh from beginning to end. Minions, cried the queen, turning rage upon Polly and seizing her hair, at the very top of her head where it hurts most. But in doing so, she let go of both the children's hands. Now, shouted Diggory, and quick, shouted Polly. They plunged their hands into their pockets. They did not even need to put the rings on. The moment they touched them, the whole of that dreary world vanished from their eyes. They were rushing upwards, and a warm green light was growing nearer overhead. The beginning of Uncle Andrew's troubles, Chapter 6. Let go, screamed Polly. I'm not touching you, said Diggory. Then their heads came out of the pool, and once more the sunny quietness of the wood between the worlds was all about them, and it seemed richer and warmer and more peaceful than ever after the stillness and ruin of the place they had just left. I think that if they had been given the chance, they would again have forgotten who they were and where they had come from, and would have lain down and enjoyed themselves, half asleep, listening to the growing of the trees. This time, there was something that kept them as wide awake as possible, for as soon as they had gotten out of the grass, they found that they were not alone. The queen, or the witch, whichever you'd like to call her, had come up with them, holding on fast by Polly's hair. That was why Polly had been shouting out, "Let go." This proved, by the way, another thing about the rings which Uncle Andrew hadn't told Diggory because he didn't know it himself. In order to jump from world to world as by one of the rings, you don't need to be wearing or touching it yourself. It is enough that you are touching someone who is touching it. In that way, they work like a magnet, and everyone knows that if you pick up a pin with a magnet, any other pin which is touching the first pin will come too. Now that you saw her in the wood, Queen Jadis looked different. She was much paler than she had been, so pale that hardly any of her beauty was left. And she was stooped and seemed to be finding it hard to breathe, as if the air of that place stifled her. Neither of the children felt in the least afraid of her now. Let go of my hair," said Polly. "What do you mean by it?" "Here, let go of her hair at once," said Diggory. They both turned and struggled with her. They were stronger than she, and in a few seconds they had forced her to let go. She reeled back, panting, and there was a look of terror in her eyes. "Quick, Diggory," said Polly. "Change rings and into the home pool." "Help! Help! Mercy!" cried the witch in a faint voice, staggering after them. "Take me with you. You cannot mean to leave me in this horrible place. It is killing me." "It's a reason of state," said Polly spitefully, "like when you killed all those people in your own world. Do be quick, Diggory." They had put on their green rings, but Diggory said, "Oh, bother, what are we to do?" He couldn't help feeling a little sorry for the queen. "Oh, don't be such an ass," said Polly. 10 to 1 she's only shamming. Do come on." And then both children plunged into the home pool. "It's a good thing we made that mark," said Polly. But as they jumped, Diggory felt that a large cold finger and thumb had caught him by the ear, and as they sank down and the confused shapes of our own world began to appear, the grip of that finger and thumb grew stronger. The witch was apparently recovering her strength. Diggory struggled and kicked, but it was not of the least use. In a moment they found themselves in Uncle Andrew's study, and there was Uncle Andrew himself, staring at the wonderful creature that Diggory had brought back from beyond the world. And, well, he might stare. Diggory and Polly stared too. There was no doubt that the witch had got over her faintness, and now that one saw her in our world, with ordinary things around her, she fairly took one's breath away. In Charn, she had been alarming enough. In London, she was terrifying. For one thing, they had not realized till now how very big she was. Hardly human was what Diggory thought when he looked at her, and he may have been right, for some say there is giantish blood in the royal family of Charn, and even her height was nothing compared with her beauty, her fierceness, and her wildness. She looked 10 times more alive than most of the people one meets in London. Uncle Andrew was bowing and rubbing his hands and looking, to tell the truth, extremely frightened. He seemed a little shrimp of a creature beside the witch, and yet, as Polly said afterwards, there was a sort of likeness between her face and his. Something in the expression. It was the look that all wicked magicians have, the mark which Jadis had said she could not find in Diggory's face. One good thing about seeing the two together was that you would never again be afraid of Uncle Andrew, any more than you'd be afraid of a worm after you'd met a rattlesnake, or afraid of a cow after you'd met a mad bull. Boo, thought Diggory to himself. Him a magician? Not much. Now she's the real thing. Uncle Andrew kept on rubbing his hands and bowing. He was trying to say something very polite, but his mouth had gone all dry so that he could not speak. His experiment with the rings, as he called it, was turning out more successful than he liked, for though he had dabbled in magic for years, he had always left all the dangers, as far as one can, to other people. Nothing at all like this had ever happened to him before. Then Jadis spoke, not very loud, but there was something in her voice that made the whole room quiver. "Where is the magician who has called me into this world?"
Madam, gasped Uncle Andrew, I am most honored, highly gratified, most unexpected pleasure. If only I had the opportunity of making any preparations, Where is the magician, fool? Said Janice. I am, madam. I hope you will excuse any liberty these naughty children may have taken. I assure you there was no intention. You, said the Queen in a still more terrible voice. Then, in one stride, she crossed the room, seized a great handful of Uncle Andrew's gray hair, and pulled his head back so that his face looked up into hers. Then she studied his face just as she had studied Diggory's face in the Palace of Charn. He blinked and licked his lips nervously all the time. At last she let him go, so suddenly that he reeled back against the wall. I see, she said scornfully. You are a magician of a sort. Stand up, dog, and don't sprawl there as if you were speaking to your equals. How do you come into know magic? You are not of royal blood, I'll swear. Well, not perhaps in the strict sense, stammered Uncle Andrew. Not exactly royal, ma'am. The Ketterleys are, however, a very old family. An old Dotshire family, ma'am. Peace, said the witch. I see what you are. You're a little peddling magician who works by rules and books. There is no real magic in your blood and heart, but your kind was made an end of in my world 1,000 years ago. But here I shall allow you to be my servant. I should be most happy, delighted to be of any service, a pleasure, I assure you. Peace, for you talk far too much. Listen to your first task. I see we are in a large city. Procure for me at once a chariot, or a flying carpet, or a well-trained dragon, or whatever is useful for royal and noble persons in your land. Then bring me to places where I can get clothes and jewels and slaves fit for my rank. Tomorrow I will begin the conquest of the world. One second. I'll go and order a cab at once, gasped Uncle Andrew. Stop, said the witch, just as he had reached the door. Do not dream of treachery. My eyes can see through walls and into the minds of men. They will be on you wherever you go. At the first sign of disobedience, I will lay such spells on you that anything you sit on will feel like red-hot iron, and wherever you lie in a bed, there will be an invisible blocks of ice at your feet. Now go. It's kind of a funny way to curse somebody. Like, you literally have described any number of other pains, but it'll feel like you're sitting on a hot iron, and your feet will always be cold. The old man went out, looking like a dog with its tail between his legs. The children were now afraid that Jadis would have something to say to them about what had happened in the wood. As it turned out, however, she never mentioned it either then or afterward. I think, and Diggory thinks too, that her mind was of a sort which cannot remember that quiet place at all, and however often you took her there, and however long you left her there, she would still know nothing about it. Now that she was left alone with the children, she took no notice of either of them. And that was like her, too. In Charn, she had taken no notice of Polly till the very end, because Diggory was the one she wanted to make use of. Now that she had Uncle Andrew, she took no notice of Diggory. I expect most witches are like that. They are not interested in things or people unless they can use them. They are terribly practical. So there was a silence in the room for a minute or two, but you could tell by the way Jadis tapped her foot on the floor that she was growing impatient. Presently, she said as if to herself, What is the old fool doing? I should have brought whip. She stalked out of the room in pursuit of Uncle Andrew without one glance at the children. Said Polly, letting out a long breath of relief. And now I must get home. It's frightfully late. I shall catch it. Well, do come back as soon as you can, said Diggory. This is simply ghastly having her here. We must make some sort of plan. That's up to your uncle now, said Polly. It's he who started all this with... My gosh, I'm sorry. It was he who started all this messing about with magic. All the same, you would come back, won't you? Hang it all, you can't leave me alone in a scrape like this. I shall go home by the tunnel, said Polly rather coldly. That'll be the quickest way. And if you want me to come back, hadn't you better say you're sorry? Sorry? Exclaimed Diggory. Well now, if that isn't just like a girl, what have I done? Oh, nothing, of course, said Polly sarcastically. Only nearly screwed my wrist off in that room with all the waxworks, like a cowardly bully. Only struck the bell with the hammer, like a silly idiot. Only turned back in the woods so that she had time to catch hold of you before we jumped into our own pool. That's all. Oh, said Diggory, very surprised. Well, all right. I'll say I'm sorry. I really am sorry about what happened in the waxworks room. There, I've said I'm sorry. Now, do be decent and come back. I shall be in a frightful hole if you don't. I don't see what's going to happen to you. It's Mr. Ketterley who's going to sit on red cotton chairs and have ice in his bed, isn't it? It isn't that sort of thing, said Diggory. What I'm bothered about is Mother. Suppose that creature went into her room. She might frighten her to death. Oh, I see, said Polly in a rather different voice. All right. We'll call it Pax. I'll come back, if I can. But I must go now. And she crawled through the little door into the tunnel, and that dark place among the rafters, which had seemed so exciting and adventurous a few hours ago, seemed quite tame and homely now. We must now go back to Uncle Andrew. His poor old heart went pit-a-pat as he staggered down the attic stairs, and he kept on dabbing at his forehead with a handkerchief. When he reached his bedroom, which was the floor below, he locked himself in. The very first thing he did was to grope about in his wardrobe for a bottle and a wine-glass which he had always kept hidden there where Aunt Letty could not find them. He poured himself out a glass of some nasty grown-up drink and drank it all off one gulp. Then he drew a deep breath. Upon my word, he said to himself, I'm dreadfully shaken. Most upsetting, and at my time of life. He poured out a second glass and drank it too. Then he began to change his clothes. You have never seen such clothes, but I can remember them. He put on a very high, shiny, stiff collar of the sort that made you hold your chin up all the time. He put on a white waistcoat with a pattern on it, and arranged his gold watch chain across the front. He put on his best frock coat, the one he kept for weddings and funerals. He got out his best tall hat and polished it up. There was a vase of flowers put there by Aunt Letty on his dressing table. He took one and put it in his buttonhole. He took a clean handkerchief, a lovely one, as such you couldn't buy today, out of a little left-hand drawer and put a few drops of scent on it. He took his eyeglass with a thick black ribbon and screwed it into his eye. Then he looked at himself in the mirror. Excuse me, he have a false eye? He took his eyeglass with a thick black ribbon and screwed it into his eye. What? I didn't know he was missing an eye. Then he looked at himself in the mirror. Children have one kind of silliness, as you know, and grown-ups have another kind. At this moment, Uncle Andrew was beginning to be silly in a very grown-up way. Now that the witch was no longer in the same room with him, he was quickly forgetting how she had frightened him, and thinking more and more of her wonderful beauty. He kept on saying to himself, "A demn fine woman, sir, a demn fine woman. A superb creature." He had also somehow managed to forget that it was the children who had got hold of this superb creature. He felt as if he himself, by his magic, had called her out of the unknown worlds. "Andrew, my boy," he said to himself as he looked in the glass, "you're a devilish well-preserved fellow at your age. A distinguished-looking man, sir." You see, the foolish old man was actually beginning to imagine the witch would fall in love with him. The 2 drinks probably had something to do with it, and so had his best clothes. But he was, in any case, as vain as a peacock. That was why he had become a magician. He unlocked the door and went downstairs, sent the housemaid out to fetch a hansom. Everyone had lots of servants in those days, and looked into the drawing room. There, as he expected, he found Aunt Letty. She was busily mending a mattress. It lay on the floor near the window, and she was kneeling on it. "Ah, Letitia, my dear," said Uncle Andrew. "I have to go out. Just lend me £5 or so. There's a good girl." Good Jell. Jell was the way he pronounced girl. "There's a good Jell." That's weird. Anyways, "No, Andrew dear," said Aunt Letty in her firm, quiet voice, without looking up from her work. Sorry, it's not a different one. I can't do a different voice, it's getting rough. Maybe. "No, Andrew dear." There we go, said Aunt Letty in her firm, quiet voice, without looking up from her work. "I've told you times without number that I will not lend you money." "Now, pray don't be troublesome, my dear Dell," said Uncle Andrew. "It's most important. If you put me in a deucedly awkward position if you don't." Andrew, said Aunt Letty, looking him straight in the face, I wonder you are not ashamed to ask me for money. There was a long, dull story of grown-up kind between these words. All you need to know about it is that Uncle Andrew, with managing dear Letty's business matters for her, had never doing any work, and running up large bills for brandy and cigars, which Aunt Letty had paid again and again, had made her a good deal poorer than she had been 30 years ago. "My dear Jell," said Uncle Andrew, "you don't understand. I shall have some quite unexpected expenses today. I have to do a little entertaining. Come now, don't be tiresome." "And who, pray tell, are you going to entertain, Andrew?" asked Aunt Letty. A most distinguished visitor has arrived." "Distinguished fiddlesticks," said Aunt Letty. "There hasn't been a ring at the bell for the last hour." At that moment, the door was suddenly flung open. Aunt Letty looked round and saw with amazement that an enormous woman, splendidly dressed, with bare arms and flashing eyes, stood in the doorway. It was the witch. I know it's not very far in, but I might need to pause it for now because my voice is struggling a little. And I don't know how many more chapters I can get through. What? Hits on the reading rug? What's that? Lynch, you have to explain what that means. Plus, it'll give me a minute to just drink and breathe. It's actually a good. I wouldn't mind a little pause. Let's do it maybe an 8-minute pause. We can talk with the audience. This is a good chapter break, and it'll give us time for me to recover, and then I can keep going. Yeah, we can do a 10-minute pause. Anybody who needs to go to the bathroom or anything, we'll just chat with the audience. Stop talking for a bit. Or have breaks. Oh, stretch. Oh, like when you got the person sitting up on the chair and showing the picture books. That's. I've never got to do that. I think the closest we had was it was like grade 3. They were reading as Harry Potter. Grade 4, and we were just at our desks, and the teacher was in the middle at the front. That's the closest I ever experienced with reading. Dating myself, grade 3, Harry Potter. Oh. What's my puppet now? I just wonder about the world between worlds, it's trees. I wonder if it's supposed to represent the Phalanx. How did stuff get out of it into another world? Why is it draining the witch but not, the children? Is it because she's evil? Is it that simple? Why did they describe the color of the earth as such a deep red? That seems weirdly specific. What are you making me do?
Oh my god, stop yawning.
I can't help it. I'm putting myself to sleep with story time. I already forgot. I think the witch's name was Letitia or Lettuce? Letish? Janish? I have no memory. Oh, no memory of this place. I wonder how many chapters to the end of it. We're almost halfway through the first book, honestly. It's pretty good progress. If I do another hour's worth of reading,
probably get almost to the end of it.
You have 5 viewers, and now you can see the chat.
Oh my gosh.
Empty.
It wasn't tea, but... Really? I guess we can finish it. Smiley face. If you wouldn't mind topping me up, it had coffee in it, but maybe just some regular tea will be fine. Thank you. Last time I had that was maybe 1st or 2nd grade. Yeah, the reading rug thing. Yeah. Warm tea. What's your favorite kind of tea? Yeah, oh, pardon me. Do you like black tea, herbal tea, peach tea? Oh, have a peach ginger tea. I found there's this one tea flavor years ago I found and tried. It was like Raboy, I think it's pronounced Roobois, and spiced plum. It was really, really good. Like really good, but I can't find it anywhere. But I did find the Raboy by itself, and I find that mixed with other fruit teas is really good. So like that with like a... Oh yeah, that sounds really nice. Like, it sounds like that would make a good iced tea. Cool drink on a hot day. Peach tastes good, just in general. Got 3 more minutes till the ad. Falling asleep. Yeah. Honey definitely helps with something. Last time I had my lemon ginger tea with honey in it. Maybe I'll do that again. I thought it'd be okay this time because coffee. Just because last time I barely touched the tea. I think the Fables, Aesop's minimal breaks in it because we were chatting more with the audience. This one, just like the solid reading, is running a little rough. So maybe next week I'll go back to having ginger tea. That helps. Yeah. Soothingness.
Water boil.
Boil faster. How was the stuff?
I liked it. D8 as well, so
Cool.
there's enough in the thing for 3 more ladle spoons, I think.
I'm glad everyone liked it.
Yeah.
There's probably no garlic bread because I only made enough.
Oh, there's 1 left. There was 2 left out there earlier, and I'm like...
I honestly was just like shooting in the dark when I was making the food.
Yeah.
We have apples, I have pork thawed. Just throw it in and see what comes out. I'm glad it turned out okay. I wouldn't exactly call it stew. It didn't really fit. It was much
It's
sweeter.
stew.
Okay. That seems good.
The thickness of it is a stew.
I'm gonna leave it watery, but I thought nobody would want that.
Nobody wants soup.
Nobody wants soup. What's the deal with soup, people? Why does nobody like soup? It's like, what's for dinner? Soup. Everyone gets real sad.
Because they're trying to find shoes and clothes, but they're in the soup store.
Oh god. The stupid thing is that you take soup, you add some flour, suddenly it's stew, and everyone's happy. Never been a fan of the soup.
Yeah, exactly. See?
See, nobody likes soup. It's better in a cup. All soup is better. Why are you buying clothes at the soup store?
He said the thing. $30. Okay. I'm gonna see if I can get through the Fable one to finish this story today. The one with the guy who's trying to save the princess in the land of goblins. And then once I finish this and the ads end, I will resume and hopefully get through maybe 2-3 more chapters of the Narnia. Spoilers. Probably stop when they enter into the world of Narnia. That's where I'm hoping to have a break. Okay, so resuming this. So the kid, Clyde Roland, was walking around the tower, screaming out loud after chopping the heads off a bunch of people. Walked into the room, damning stuff. Okay. So he went down this passage till he came to 2 tall, wide folding doors, and when he went through them, he saw a most glorious sight, for he was now in a spacious hall, having pillars of gold and silver. What is with these old fairy tales and golds and silver? Entwined with wreaths of flowers, which were made of diamonds, emeralds, and other precious stones. From the center of the high arched ceiling, an immense lamp swung on a golden chain. It was made out of big pearl made of one big pearl, hollowed out and quite transparent. Within the pearl was a huge red ruby, kept spinning round and round, throwing out light that lit the whole hall. It seemed as if the setting sun shone on it, and at the end of the great room, Bird Ellen sat on a couch of velvet and gold. She was combing her golden hair with a silver comb, but looking sad, very sad. Up she sprang when she saw Clyde Roland, and she cried in a woeful voice, "Oh, my brother, God pity you! Why did you ever come here? 2 brothers we've lost already. Why didn't you bide at home with our mother? For woe be unto you if the king of Elfland finds you." "I came for you," Clyde Roland cried. "'Twas useless. 'Twill be your death," she answered. "But since you're here, come and sit ye down by my side." What the hell? You're gonna die, but you might as well come sit with me. So the two sat down together, and Bird Ellen told Clyde Roland all her sorry tale, how she herself was kept imprisoned here, and how their brothers had been enchanted by the king of Elfland, and were lying now in stone tombs in the cellar as if they had been dead. A long time these two talked, then Clyde Roland began to be hungry, and forgetting all about Merlin's warning, he asked for something to eat and drink. Sadly, Bird Ellen looked at him, for she knew what would happen to him if he ate a bite in the castle. After all, those other 2 brothers of hers had met the sad fate that had befallen them because they had failed to obey all the instructions Merlin had given them. But the Goblin King had put her under a spell so that she could not speak out and warn Clyde Roland. She could only let her eyes speak for her. She could only let her eyes speak for her, and her pleading eyes did not read. And her pleading eyes he did not read. So rising, she left him in time. She returned with a loaf of bread and a golden bowl of milk. Eagerly seizing the bowl, Clyde Roland had raised it to his lips when suddenly he remembered all that Merlin had said. Before he had sipped a drop, he dashed the bowl to the ground and cried, "Damn, drama queen! Not a bite will I eat, not a drop will I sip in Elfland." It's like, "Hey, bring me something to eat." Just about to eat it. Ah! Throws it to the ground.
Poison.
Bah, poison! I'm sorry. I'm like, "I'm hungry, get me something." After being warned everything in the house is poison, brings it and is like, "Ah, poison," throws it on the ground. As though in answer to those words of defiance, the two heard at that very moment an angry roaring and the stamping of feet. Don't, dude, he's gonna chop off your head, coming down the passageway towards them. Then the Goblin King burst into the room, black and terrible and snorting fire. Still all undaunted, Clyde Roland drew his good sword and rushed to meet the goblin. Strike if thou darest. There we go. "Strike if thou darest," he cried. But the goblin also brandished a sword in one of his claw-like hands. A wicked-looking sword it was, for it sparked and flashed with evil light, and it swished through the air with a furious hiss like a snake about to strike. And as the goblin came raging forward, he appeared to grow and grow in size, till he seemed nothing less than a giant. Bellowing, he leapt here and there, striking out at the youth with that sword, while poor Bird Ellen stood by, pale and speechless, with fear for her brother. But Clyde Rowland bore that sword, which I can't get over the fact her brother's just apparently. Anyways, bore the sword which had never been drawn, save in a cause that was good and just. What? But Clyde Rowland bore the sword which had never been drawn, save in a cause that was good and just, his father's sword, which had never struck in vain, and there was no blow the goblin struck that Clyde Rowland did not parry and turn aside. For hours they fought. That's impressive. Swinging a sword for hours is not easy. Then at last Clyde Rowland pressed the goblin hard. With one mighty sweep of his sword, he sent the goblin's sword flying out of his claw and off to a distance, where it fell to the ground dead and lifeless. He sent the goblin's sword flying off of his claw and off to a distance where it fell to the floor dead and lifeless. Oh, the sword was alive. Okay. No longer sparking and hissing. And now the goblin was on his knees with Clyde Rowland's sword pricking his throat. With a terrible scream, he begged for his life. "I'll grant thee life on one condition only." Oh, that was Clyde. I'm sorry. "I'll grant thee thy life on one condition only," Clyde Rowland cried. "If thou wouldst not die by my sword, thou must release my sister from thy spells and raise my brother to life." "Agreed," the goblin said sullenly, and rising, he went to a chest from which he took a vial filled with blood-red liquor, while Clyde Rowland followed, pricking him with his sword to keep him at this task. Then the goblin led Clyde Rowland down to the cellar, where stood a row of stone tombs, and he opened two of these. The youth saw his brothers laying there, as though they had been dead. But when the king had anointed the ears, the eyelids, nostrils, lips, and fingertips of the two, they sprang at once into life. After that, the elfin king said the words that disenchanted Bird Ellen. Then she and her three brothers went down the long passage and out of doors, where they turned their backs on the dark tower forever. Happily they reached home, where the good queen— oh, he didn't kill him. Queen welcomed her children with the greatest joy, and Bird Ellen never went round to church Windershins again. That is a weird story. Yeah, no, valid. I'm good to go a little bit longer. I was more silly on that one, less concerned. It was a little easier on my throat. What's up? Ah, the gasp, the timer. Okay.
Well, it just tells me what that is.
Is this the tea? Is it super hot? Oh, it's super hot.
It's tea. It just isn't brewed. Of course.
If I bring that, well, I'm not reading no more.
Then wait for a while. Or do you need some cold?
No, cold water not good on throat.
No suggestion. You can't drink hot, you can't drink cold.
I would almost say a lozenge candy, but I don't think anyone wants to hear. Anyways, I'll just keep reading. It's fine. Chapter 7. What happened at the front door? "Now, slave, how long am I to wait for my chariot?" thundered the witch. Uncle Andrew cowered away from her now that she was really present. All the silly thoughts he had whilst looking at himself in the glass were oozing out of him. But Aunt Letty at once got up from her knees and came over to the center of the room. "And who is this young person, Andrew, may I ask?" said Aunt Letty in icy tones. Distinguished foreigner, a very important person," he stammered. "Rubbish," said Aunt Letty, and then turning to the witch, "Get out of my house this moment, you shameless hussy, or I'll send for the police." She thought the witch must be someone out of a circus, and she did not approve of bare arms. Of all the things wrong, I'm sorry, but Aunt Letty's like, "I can see your elbows, you hussy." I'm sorry. You're showing your elbows. Okay. It was a different time. Instantly, as it seemed to Uncle Andrew, the queen towered up to an even greater height. Oh, sorry. Bare arms, there we go. "What woman is this?" said Jadis. "Down on your knees, minion, before I blast you." No strong language in this house, if you please, young woman, said Aunt Letty. Instantly, as it seemed to Uncle Andrew, the Queen towered up to an even greater height. Fire flashed from her eyes. She flung out her arm with the same gesture and the same horrible-sounding words that had lately turned the palace gates of Charn to dust. But nothing happened, except that Aunt Letty, thinking those horrible words were meant to be ordinary English, said, I thought as much. The woman is drunk. She can't even speak clearly. It must have been a terrible moment for the witch when she suddenly realized that her power of turning people into dust, which had been quite real in her own world, was not going to work in ours. But she did not lose her nerve even for a second. Without wasting a thought on her disappointment, she lunged forwards, caught Aunt Letty round the neck and the knees, raised her high above her head as if she were no heavier than a doll, and threw her across the room. While Aunt Letty was still hurtling through the air, the housemaid, who was having a beautifully exciting morning, the housemaid, who was having a beautifully exciting morning, put her head in the door and said, If you please, sir, the Ansom's come. Lead on, slave, said the witch to Uncle Andrew. He began muttering something about regrettable violence, must really protest, but at a single glance from Jadis he became speechless. She drove him out of the room and out of the house, and Diggory came running down the stairs just in time to see the front door close behind them. Jiminy, he said, she's loose in London, and with Uncle Andrew, I wonder what on earth's going to happen now. Oh, Master Diggory, said the housemaid, who was really having a wonderful day, I think Miss Ketterly's hurt herself somehow. So they both rushed into the drawing-room to find out what had happened. If Aunt Letty had fallen on bare boards, or even on the carpet, I suppose all her bones would have been broken, but by great good luck, she had fallen on the mattress. Aunt Letty was a very tough old lady. Aunts often were in those days. After she had had some sal volatile, and I assume that's alcohol, after she had a shot, and sat still for a few minutes. Maybe, can you Google what sal volatile is? SAL space VOLATILE. It might actually be like smelling salts. OLATIL. Yeah. Oh yeah, okay, so it's smelling salts. Sorry, Aunt's not getting drunk. She's being woken up, so she was unconscious. Okay. And sat still for a few minutes. She said there was nothing the matter with her except a few bruises. Very soon she was taking charge of the situation. Sarah, she said to the housemaid, who had never had such a day before, go round to the police station at once and tell them there is a dangerous lunatic at large. I will take Miss Kirk's lunch up myself. Miss Kirk was, of course, Diggory's mother. When Mother's lunch had been seen to, Diggory and Aunt Letty, I love the fact that her first concern is to make sure that his mother is taken care of. Not vengeance. Not like making sure she's like, I need to take care of this other person. That really shows the aunt's character. It's unfortunate that her brother's so horrible. I just had to say that. I really like that. Diggory and Aunt Letty had their own. After that, he did some hard thinking. The problem was how to get the witch back to her own world, or at any rate out of ours, as soon as possible. Whatever happened, she must not be allowed to go rampaging around the house. Mother must not see her, and, if possible, she must not be allowed to go rampaging about London either. Diggory had not been in the drawing-room when she tried to blast Aunt Letty, but he had seen her blast the gates at Charn, so he knew her terrible powers, and did not know that she had lost any of them by coming into our world. And he knew she meant to conquer our world. At the present moment, as far as he could see, she might be blasting Buckingham Palace or the House of Parliament, but it was almost certain that quite a number of policemen had by now been reduced to little heaps of dust, and there didn't seem to be anything he could do about it. But the rings seem to work like magnets, thought Diggory. If I can only touch her, and then slip on my yellow, we shall both go into the wood between worlds. I wonder, will she go all faint again there? Was that something the place does to her? Or was it only the shock of being pulled out of her own world? But I suppose I'll have to risk that. How am I to find the beast? I don't suppose Aunt Letty would let me go out, not unless I said where I was going. And I haven't got more than 2 pence. I'll need any amount of money for buses and trams if I went looking all over London. Anyway, I haven't the faintest idea where to look. I wonder if Uncle Andrew was still with her. It seemed in the end that the only thing he could do was to wait and hope that Uncle Andrew and the witch would come back. If they did, he might rush out and get a hold of the witch and put on his yellow ring before she had a chance to get into the house. This meant that he must watch the front door like a cat watching a mouse hole. He dared not leave his post for a moment. So he went into the dining room and glued his face, as they say, to the window. It was a bow window from which you could see the steps up to the front door and see up and down the street, so that no one could reach the front door without you knowing. I wonder what Polly's doing, thought Diggory. He wondered about this a good deal as the slow first half-hour ticked on. But you need not wonder, for I am going to tell you. She had gone home late for her dinner, and with her shoes and stockings very wet. And when they asked her where she had been and what on earth she had been doing, she said that she had been out with Diggory Kirk. Under further questioning, she said that she got her feet wet in a pool of water, and that the pool was in a wood. Asked where the wood was, she said she didn't know. Asked if it was in one of the parks, she said truthfully enough that she supposed it might be a sort of park. From all of this, Polly's mother got the idea that Polly had gone off, without telling anyone, to some part of London she didn't know, and gone into a strange park and amused herself by jumping into puddles. As a result, she was told that she had been very naughty indeed, and that she wouldn't be allowed to play with that Kirk boy any more if anything of the sort ever happened again. Then she was given dinner with all the nice parts left out, and sent to bed for 2 solid hours. It was a thing that happened to one quite often in those days. So when Diggory was staring out of the dining room window, Polly was lying in bed, and both were thinking how terribly slowly the time could go. I think myself I would rather have been in Polly's position. She had only to wait for the end for 2 hours, but for every few minutes Diggory would hear a cab, or a baker's van, or a butcher's boy coming round the corner and think, "Here she comes," and then find it wasn't. In between those false alarms, for what seemed hours and hours, the clock ticked on, and one big fly, high up and far out of reach, buzzed against the window. It was one of those houses that got very quiet and dull in the afternoon, and always seemed to smell of mutton. During his long watching and waiting, one small thing happened, which I shall have to mention, because something important came of it later on. A lady called with some grapes for Diggory's mother, and as the dining room door opened, Diggory couldn't help overhear Aunt Letty and the lady as they talked in the hall. "What lovely grapes!" came Aunt Letty's voice. "I'm sure if anything could do her good, these would. Poor dear, my little Mabel. I'm afraid it would need fruit from the land of youth to help her now. Nothing in this world will do much." Then they both lowered their voices and said a lot more that he could not hear. If he had heard that bit about the land of youth a few days ago, he would have thought Aunt Letty was just talking without meaning anything in particular, the way grown-ups do, and it wouldn't have interested him. He almost thought so now, but suddenly it flashed upon his mind that he now knew, even if Aunt Letty didn't, that there really were other worlds, and that he himself had been in one of them. At that rate, there might be a real land of youth somewhere. There might be almost anything. There might be fruit in some other world that would really cure his mother. And, well, you know how it feels as if you begin hoping for something that you want desperately badly? You almost fight against the hope because it's too good to be true. You've been disappointed so often before. That's how Diggory felt. But it was no good trying to throttle this hope. It might, really, it just might be true. So many odd things had happened already, and he had the magic rings. There must be worlds you could get to through every pool in the wood. He could hunt through them all, and then, mother well again, everything right again. He forgot all about watching for the witch. His hand was already going into the pocket where he kept the yellow ring, when all at once he heard a sound of galloping. "Hello, what's that?" thought Diggory. "Fire engine? I wonder what house is on fire. Great Scott, it's coming here. Why, it's her. I needn't tell you who he meant by her." First came the hansom. There were no one in the driver's seat, on the roof, nor sitting, but standing on the roof, swaying with superb balance as it came full speed round the corner with one wheel in the air, was Jadis, the Queen of Queens and the Terror of Charn. Her teeth were bared, her eyes shone like fire, and her long hair streamed out behind her like a comet's tail. She was flogging the horse without mercy. Its nostrils were wide and red, and its sides were spotted with foam. It galloped madly up to the front door, missing the lamppost by an inch, and then reared up on its hind legs. The hansom crashed into the lamppost and shattered into several pieces. The witch, with a magnificent jump, had sprung clear just in time and landed on the horse's back. She settled herself astride and leaned forward, whispering things in its ear. They must have been things meant not to quiet it, but to madden it. It was on its hind legs again in a moment, and his neigh was like a scream. It was all hoof and teeth and eyes and tossing mane. Only a splendid rider could have stayed on its back. Before Diggory had recovered his breath, a good many other things began to happen. A second hansom dashed up close behind the first. Out of there jumped a fat man in a frock coat and a policeman. There came a third hansom and two more policemen in it. After it came about 20 people, mostly errand boys, on bicycles, all ringing their bells and letting out cheers and catcalls. Last of all came a crowd of people on foot, all very hot with running, but obviously enjoying themselves. Windows shot up in all the houses of that street, and a housemaid or a butler appeared at every front door. They wanted to see the fun.
When you don't have television. Or potentially radio. Because I think this may be before World War One. As they're saying, because I'm trying to remember, the Narnia series was based, I know one of the wars was happening when the kids were young, and they're saying that this happened back when your grandparents were kids. So that, yeah, this is probably back in the 1800s.
Sorry about the pause. So they probably didn't have radio. Right? I don't remember. Sorry about the pause. They wanted to see the fun. Meanwhile, an old gentleman had begun to struggle shakily out of... I just want to curious if anyone said anything. Yeah. Sorry, I paused to read chat. Slavic plum liquor. Cute. Focus. Sorry. Meanwhile, an old gentleman had begun to struggle shakily out of the ruins of the first hansom. Several people rushed forward to help him, but as one pulled him one way, and another perhaps in another, perhaps he would have got out quite as quickly on his own. Diggory guessed the old gentleman must be Uncle Andrew, but you couldn't see his face. His tall hat had been bashed down over it. Diggory rushed out and joined the crowd. That's the woman, cried the fat man, pointing at Jadis. Do your duty, constable. Hundreds of thousands of pounds worth she's taken out of my shop. Look at that rope of pearls round her neck. That's mine, and she's given me a black eye too, what's more. That she has, governor, said one of the crowd, and as lovely a black eye as I'd wish to see. Beautiful bit of work that must have been. Gor, ain't she strong then? You ought to put a raw beefsteak on it, mister. That's what it wants, says the butcher's boy. Now then, said the most important of the policemen, what's all this here? I tell you, began the fat man when someone else called out. Don't let the old cove in the cab get away. Put her up to it. He put her up to it. The old gentleman, who was certainly Uncle Andrew, had just succeeded in standing up and was rubbing his bruises. Now then, said the policeman, turning to him, what's all this? Badoop. Oh, cool. Thanks for the answer. Okay, so yeah. The story began in London during the summer of the 1900. Okay, Peter, Susan, Edmund, Lucy are evacuated from London in 1940 to escape the Blitz. Yeah. Thank you for that. Oh, cool. Came Uncle Andrew's voice from inside the hat. "Know that now," said the policeman sternly. You'll find this is no laughing matter. Take that off. Take that hat off, see? This was more easily said than done, but after Uncle Andrew had struggled in vain with the hat for some time, 2 other policemen seized it by the brim and forced it off. Thank you, said Uncle Andrew in a faint voice. Thank you. Dear me, I'm terribly shaken. If somebody could give me a small glass of brandy. Now, you attend to me, if you please, said the policeman, taking out a very large notebook and a very small pencil. Are you in charge of that there young woman? Look out! Called several voices, and the policeman jumped a step backwards just in time. The horse had aimed a kick at him, which would probably have killed him. Then the witch wheeled the horse round so that she faced the crowd, and its hind legs were on the front footpath. She had a long, bright knife in her hand, and had been busily cutting the horse free from the wreck of the hansom. All this time, Diggory had been trying to get into a position from which he could touch the witch. This wasn't at all easy, because on the side nearest him there were too many people, and in order to get round to the other side, he had to pass between the horse's hooves and the railings of the area that surrounded the house. For the Ketterleys' house had a basement. If you know anything about horses, especially if you had seen what a state that horse was in at the moment, you would realize that this was a ticklish thing to do. Diggory knew lots about horses, but he set his teeth and got ready to make a dash for it as soon as he saw a favorable moment. A red-faced man in a bowler hat had now shouldered his way to the front of the crowd. "Aye, policeman," he said. "That's my 'orse what she's sitting on, same as it's my cow what she's made matchwood of." "One at a time, please, one at a time," said the policeman. "But there ain't no time," said the cabby. "I know that 'orse better than you do. 'Tain't an ordinary 'orse. His father was horrific officer's charger in the cavalry, he was. And if young woman goes on axing him like, there'll be murder done. Here, let me get at him." The policeman was only too glad to have a good reason for standing further away from the horse. The cabby took a step nearer, looked up at Jadis, and said in a not unkindly voice, "Now, missy, let me get at his head, and just you get off. You're a lady, and you don't want any of these roughs going for you, do you? You want to go home and have a nice cup of tea and a lay down quiet like. Then you'll feel ever so much better." At that same time, he stretched out his hand towards the horse's head with the words, "Steady, Strawberry, old boy, steady now." Then, for the first time, the witch spoke. "Dog!" came her cold, clear voice ringing out above all other noises. "Dog, unhand our royal charger. We are the Empress Jadis." Oh, she's upgraded herself to Empress, I see. Chapter 8. The Flight at the Lamppost. "Oh, Empress, are you? We'll see about that," said a voice. Oh, who the hell is that? "Oh, Empress, are you? We'll see about that," said a voice. Then another voice. "3 cheers for Hempress of Colney Atch," and quite a number joined in. A flush of color came into the witch's face, and she bowed ever so slightly. But the cheers died away into roars of laughter, and she saw that they had only been making fun of her. A change came over her expression, and she changed the knife to her left hand. Then, without warning, she did a thing that was dreadful to see. Lightly, easily, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world, she stretched up her right arm and wrenched off one of the crossbars of the lamppost. If she had lost some magical power in our world, she had not lost her strength. She could break an iron bar as if it were a stick of barley sugar. She tossed her new weapon up into the air, caught it again, brandished it, and urged the horse forwards. "Now's my chance," thought Diggory. He darted between the horse and the railings and began going forward. If only the brute would stay still for a moment, he might catch the witch's heel. As he rushed, he heard a sickening crash and thud. The witch had brought the bar down on the chief policeman's helmet. The man fell like a ninepin. 1 second, I got something in my eye. I'm sorry. Where's my bookmark? Ugh. I got an eyelash. Uh-oh. Don't want the mute. Don't want the phone to cause a feedback. Yeah, but it could still cause a shrieking. I don't think anybody wants that. I think I'm good.
Ba. Felt like a 9-pin. Quick, Diggory, this must be stopped, said a voice beside him. It was Polly, who had rushed down the moment she was allowed out of bed. You are a brick, said Diggory. Hold on to me tight. You'll have to manage the ring. Yellow, remember? And don't put it on till I shout. There was a second crash, and another policeman crumpled up. There came an angry roar from the crowd. Pull her down! Get a few paving stones! Call out the military! But most of them were getting as far away as they could. The cabbie, however, obviously the bravest as well as the kindest person present, was keeping close to the horse, dodging this way and that to avoid the bar, but still trying to catch Strawberry's head. The crowd booed and bellowed again. A stone whistled over Diggory's head. Then came the voice of the witch, clear like a great bell, and sounding as if, for once, she was almost happy. Scum! You shall pay dearly for this when I have conquered your world. Not one stone of your city will be left. I will make it as charmed, as Felinda, as Sorless, as Bramadin. Diggory at last caught her ankle. She kicked back with her heel and hit him in the mouth. In his pain, he lost hold. His lip was cut and his mouth full of blood. From somewhere very close came the voice of Uncle Andrew in a sort of trembling scream. Madam, my dear young lady, for heaven's sake, compose yourself. Diggory made a second grab at her heel and was again shaken off. More men were knocked down by the iron bar. He made a third grab, caught her heel, held on like grim death, shouting to Polly, Go! Then, oh thank goodness, the angry, frightened faces had vanished. The angry, frightened voices were silenced. All except Uncle Andrew's, close behind Diggory in the darkness. He was wailing on, Oh, is this delirium? Is it the end? I can't bear it, it's not fair. I never meant to be a magician. It's all a misunderstanding. It's all my godmother's fault. I must protest against this. In my state of health, too. A very old Dorsetshire family. Bother, thought Diggory. We didn't want to bring him along. My hat, what a panic. Are you there, Polly? Yes, I am here. Don't keep on shoving. I'm not, began Diggory, but before he could say anything more, their heads came up out into the warm green sunshine of the wood, and as they stepped out into the pool, Polly cried out, Oh, look, we've brought the old horse with us, too, and Mr. Ketterly, and the cabbie. This is a pretty kettle of fish. As soon as the witch saw that she was once more in the wood, she turned pale and bent down till her face touched the mane of the horse. You could see she felt deathly sick. Uncle Andrew was shivering, but Strawberry the horse shook his head, gave a cheerful whinny, and seemed to feel better. He became quiet for the first time since Diggory had seen him. His ears, which had been laid flat back on his skull, came into their proper position, and the fire went out of his eyes. That's right, old boy, said the cabbie, slapping Strawberry's neck. That's better. Take it easy. Strawberry did the most natural thing in the world, being very thirsty, and no wonder. He walked slowly across to the nearest pool and stepped into it to have a drink. Diggory was still holding the witch's heel, and Polly was holding Diggory's hand. One of the cabbie's hands was on Strawberry, and Uncle Andrew, still very shaky, had just grabbed the cabbie's other hand. Quick, said Polly with a look to Diggory. Greens. So the horse never got his drink. Instead, the whole party found themselves sinking into darkness. Strawberry neighed, Uncle Andrew whimpered, and Diggory said, That was a bit of luck. There was a short pause, then Polly said, Oughtn't we be nearly there now? We do seem to be somewhere, said Diggory. At least I'm standing on something solid. Why, so am I. Now that I come to think of it, said Polly. But why is it so dark? I say, do you think we got into the wrong pool? Perhaps this is Charn, said Diggory. Only we've got back in the middle of the night. This is not Charn, said the witch's voice. This is an empty world. This is nothing. And really, it was uncommonly like nothing. There were no stars. It was so dark that they couldn't see one another at all, and it made no difference whether you kept your eyes shut or open. Under their feet, there was a cool, flat something, which might have been earth. There was certainly no grass or wood. The air was cold and dry, and there was no wind. My doom has come upon me, said the queen in a voice of horrible calmness.
Oh, don't say that, babbled Uncle Andrew. My dear young lady, pray don't say such things. It can't be as bad as that. Cabman, my good man, you don't happen to have a flask about you. A drop of spirits is just what I need. Now then, said the cabbie's voice, a good, firm, hearty voice. Keep cool, everyone. That's what I say. No bonds broken. Anyone? Good. Well, there's something you must be thankful for straight away, and more than anyone would expect after falling all that way. Now, if we've fallen down some diggings, as it might be for a new station on the underground, someone will come and get us out presently, see? And if we're dead, well, which I don't deny it might be, well, you got to remember that worse things happen at sea, and chaps got to die sometime. And there ain't nothing to be afraid of if a chap's led a decent life. If you ask me, I think the best thing we could do to pass the time would be to sing a hymn. And he did. He struck up at once a harvest. I don't want to, I want to delve into the questions of this, but I also don't. Because this is an empty world with nothing, right? And the cabman decided to sing a hymn. I'm assuming that the first thing you do is what creates whatever is in this world. Do you suppose that the lion in this book isn't, because we all know, it's pretty obvious that the lion is a representation of... I don't want to offend viewers, but Narnia is a book about God. The lion is supposed to represent God. He intervenes in the lives of the children and brings them back and forth between Narnia, but we never see them refer to the in-between worlds. What if the lion that shows up in this book was actually created in the void of this world? Because it's the first thing that comes from the hymn. It is that powerful because, again, it's out of the nothingness. Anyways, really worried about delving into religious conversations because, again, this is just the perspective of the author who wrote the book, potentially. A hymn. Where did I read him say hymn? There it is. And he did. He struck up at once a harvest Thanksgiving hymn, all about crops being safely gathered in. It was not very subtle to a place which felt as if nothing had ever grown there since the beginning of time. But it was the one he could remember best. He had a fine voice, and the children joined in. It was very cheering. Uncle Andrew and the witch did not join in. Towards the end of the hymn, Diggory felt someone plucking at his elbow, and from a general smell of brandy and cigars and good clothes, he decided it must be Uncle Andrew. Uncle Andrew was cautiously pulling him away from the others. When they had gone a little distance, the old man put his mouth so close to Diggory's ear that it tickled and whispered, "Now, my boy, slip on your ring. Let's be off." But the witch had very good ears. "Fool!" came her voice, and she leapt off the horse. "Have you forgotten that I can hear men's thoughts? Let go the boy. If you attempt treachery, I will take such vengeance upon you as never was heard in all the worlds from the beginning. And," added Diggory, "if you think I'm such a mean pig as you to go off and leave Polly, and the cabby, and the horse, in a place like this, you're well mistaken." "You're a very naughty and impertinent little boy," said Uncle Andrew. "Hush," said the cabby. They all listened. In the darkness, something was happening at last. A voice had begun to sing. It was very far away, and Diggory found it hard to decide from which direction it was coming. Sometimes it seemed to come from all directions at once. Sometimes he almost thought it was coming out of the very earth beneath them. Its lower notes were deep enough to be the voice of the earth herself. There were no words. There were hardly even a tune. But it was beyond comprehension, the most beautiful noise he had ever heard. It was so beautiful, he could hardly bear it. The horse seemed to like it too. He gave the sort of whinny a horse would give if, after years of being a cab horse, it found itself back in the old field where it had played as a foal, and saw someone whom it remembered and loved coming across the field to bring it a lump of sugar. "God," said the cabby, "ain't it lovely?" Then two wonders happened at the same moment. One was that the voice was suddenly joined by the other voices, more voices than you could possibly count. They were in harmony with it, but far higher up the scale, cold, tinkling, silvery voices. Sounds. The second wonder was that the blackness overhead all at once was blazing with stars. They didn't come out gently one by one as they do on a summer evening. One moment there had been nothing but darkness. The next moment 1,000 points of light leapt out. Single stars, constellations, and planets, brighter and brighter than any in our world. There were no clouds. The new stars and the new voices began at exactly the same time. If you had seen and heard it as Diggory did, you would have felt quite certain that it was the stars themselves which were singing, and that it was the first voice, the deep one, which had made them appear and made them sing. "Glory be," said the cabby. I'm sorry, I'm struggling with this one. "I have been a better man all my life if I'd known there were things like this." The voice on the earth was now louder and more triumphant, but the voices in the sky, after singing loudly with it for a time, began to get fainter, and now something else was happening. Far away and down near the horizon, the sky began to turn gray. A light wind, very fresh, began to stir. The sky in that one place grew slowly and steadily paler. You could see shapes of hills standing up dark against it. All the time the voice went on singing. There was soon light enough for them to see one another's faces. The cabby and the two children had open mouths and shining eyes. They were drinking in the sound, and they looked as if it reminded them of something. Uncle Andrew's mouth was open too, but not wide with joy. He looked more as if his chin had simply dropped away from the rest of his face. His shoulders were stooped and his knees shook. He was not liking the voice. If he could have got away from it by creeping into a rat's hole, he would have done so. But the witch looked as if, in a way, she understood the music better than any of them. Her mouth was shut, her lips pressed together, and her fists were clenched. Ever since the song began, she had felt that this whole world was filled with magic different from hers and stronger. She would have smashed the whole world, or all worlds, to pieces if it would only stop the singing. The horse stood with its ears well forward and twitching. Every now and then it snorted and stamped the ground. It no longer looked like a tired old cab horse. You could now well believe that its father had been in battles. The eastern sky changed from white to pink, and from pink to gold. The voice rose and rose, till all the air was shaking with it. And just as it swelled to the mightiest and most glorious sound it had been that had yet produced, the sun arose. Diggory had never seen such a sun. The sun above the ruins of Charn had looked older than ours. This looked younger. You could imagine that it laughed for joy as it came up, and as its beams shot across the land, the travelers could see for the first time what sort of place they were in. It was a valley, through which a broad, swift river wound its way, flowing eastward toward the sun. Southward there were mountains, northward there were lower hills, but it was a valley of mere earth, rock, and water. There was not a tree, not a brush, not a blade of grass to be seen. The earth was of many colors. They were fresh, hot, and vivid. They made you feel excited until you saw the singer himself, and then you forgot everything. It was a lion, huge, shaggy, and bright. It stood facing the rising sun. Its mouth was wide open in song. It was about 300 yards away. "This is a terrible world," said the witch. "We must fly at once. Prepare the magic." "I quite agree with you, madam," said Uncle Andrew. "A most disagreeable place. Completely uncivilized. If only I were a younger man and had a gun." "Garn," said the cabby. "You don't think you could shoot him, do you?" "And who would?" said Polly. "Try the magic, old fool," said Jadis. "Certainly, madam," said Uncle Andrew cunningly. "I must have both the children touching me. Put on your homeward ring at once, Diggory." He wanted to get away without the witch. "Oh, it's rings, is it?" said Jadis. She would have had her hands in Diggory's pocket before you could say knife, but Diggory grabbed Polly and shouted out, "Take care. If either of you come half an inch near, we two will vanish, and you'll be left here for good. Yes, I have a ring in my pocket that will take Polly and me home. And look, my hand's just ready, so keep your distance. I'm sorry about you," he looked at the cabby, "and about the horse, but I can't help that. As for you two," he looked at Uncle Andrew and the Queen, "you're both magicians, so you ought to enjoy living together." "Hold your noise, everyone," said the cabby. "I want to listen to the music." The song had now changed. How's chat doing? Chat is quiet. or this thing is not updating. My tea is too hot. Back to book. Chapter 9. What? I thought I heard a laugh. Sorry. Chapter 9. The Founding of Narnia. The lion was pacing to and fro about the empty land and singing his new song. It was softer and more lilting than the song by which he had called up the stars and the sun, a gentle, rippling music. And as he walked and sang, the valley grew green with grass. It spread out from the lion like a pool. It ran up the sides of the little hills like a wave. In a few minutes it was creeping up the lower slopes of the distant mountains, making that young world every moment softer. The light wind could now be heard ruffling the grass. Soon there were other things besides grass. The higher slopes grew dark with heather. Patches of rougher and more bristling green appeared in the valley. Diggory did not know what they were until one began coming up quite close to him. It was a little spiky thing that threw out dozens of arms and covered those arms with green and grew larger, at the rate about an inch every 2 seconds. There were dozens of these things all around him now. When they were nearly as tall as himself, he saw what they were. "Trees!" he exclaimed. The nuisance of it, as Polly said afterwards, was that you weren't left... I don't know that word. The nuisance? Sorry, nuisance. It's not nuance. Nuisance of it, as Polly said afterwards, was that you weren't left in peace to watch it all. It is nuisance. She's pissed at... Sorry, Polly's mad at him. Surprise. Afterwards, that you weren't left in peace to watch it all. Just as Diggory said trees, he had to jump because Uncle Andrew had sidled up to him again and was going to pick his pocket. It wouldn't have done Uncle Andrew much good if he had succeeded, for he was aiming for the right-hand pocket, because he still thought the green wings were homeward rings. But of course, Diggory didn't want to lose either. Stop, called the witch. Stand back. No, further back. If anyone goes within 10 paces of either of the children, I will knock out his brains. She was poising in her hand the iron bar that she had torn from the lamppost, ready to throw it. Somehow, no one doubted that she would be a very good shot. "So," she said, "you would steal back to your own world with the boy and leave me here." Uncle Andrew's temper at last got the better of him. "Yes, ma'am, I would," he said. "Most undoubtedly I would. I should be perfectly in my rights. I have most shamedly, most abominably treated. I have done my best to show you such civilities as were in my power. And what has been my reward? You have robbed me. I must repeat the word. Robbed a highly respectable jeweler. You have robbed. You have insisted on my entertaining you to an exceedingly expensive, not to say ostentatious lunch, though I was obliged to pawn my watch and chain in order to do so, and let me tell you, ma'am, that none of our family have been in the habit of frequenting pawn shops except my cousin Edward, and he was in the yeomanry. During that indigestible meal, I'm feeling the worse for it at this very moment. Your behavior and conversation attracted the unfavorable attention of everyone present. I feel I have been publicly disgraced. I shall never be able to show my face in that restaurant again. You have assaulted the police. You have stolen... "Oh, stow it, governor, do stow it," said the cabby. "Watching and listening's the thing at present, not talking." There was certainly plenty to watch and to listen to. The trees which Diggory had noticed were now a fully grown beech, whose branches swayed gently above his head. They stood on cool green grass, sprinkled with daisies and buttercups. A little way off, along the river bank, willows were growing. On the other side, tangles of flowering currant, lilac, wild rose, and rhododendron closed them in. The horse was tearing up delicious mouthfuls of new grass. All this time, the lion's song and his stately prowl to and fro, backwards and forwards, was going on. What was rather alarming was that at each turn he came a little nearer. Polly was finding the song more and more interesting because she thought she was beginning to see a connection between the music and the things that were happening. When a line of dark firs sprang up on a ridge about 100 yards away, she felt that they were connected with a series of deep, prolonged notes, which the lion had sung a second before. And when he burst into a rapid series of lighter notes, she was not surprised to see primroses suddenly appearing in every direction. Thus, with an unspeakable thrill, she felt quite certain
that all the things were coming, as she said, out of the lion's head. When you listened to his song, you heard the things he was making up. When you looked around you, you saw them. This was so exciting that she had no time to be afraid. But Diggory and the cabbie could not help feeling a bit nervous at each turn of the lion's walk brought him nearer. As for Uncle Andrew, his teeth were chattering, but his knees were shaking so that he could not run away. Suddenly the witch stepped boldly out towards the lion. He was coming on, always singing with a slow, heavy pace. It was only 12 yards away. She raised her arm and flung the iron bar straight at its head. Nobody, least of all Jadis, could have missed at that range. The bar struck the lion fair between the eyes. It glanced off and fell with a thud in the grass. The lion came on. Its walk was neither slower nor faster than before. You could not tell whether it even knew it had been hit. Though its soft pads made no noise, you could feel the earth shake beneath their weight. The witch shrieked and ran. In a few moments she was out of sight among the trees. Uncle Andrew turned to do likewise, tripping over a root, and fell flat on his face in a little brook that ran down to join the river. The children could not move. They were not even quite sure that they wanted to. The lion paid no attention to them. Its huge red mouth was open, but open in song, not in a snarl. It passed by them so close that they could have touched its mane. They were terribly afraid it would turn and look at them, yet in some queer way they wished it would. But for all the notice it took of them, they might just as well have been invisible and unsmellable. When it had passed them and gone a few paces further, it turned, passed them again, and continued its march eastward. Uncle Andrew, coughing and sputtering, picked himself up. "No, Diggory, we've got rid of that woman, and that brute of a lion is gone. Give me your hands and put on your ring at once." "Keep off," said Diggory, backing away from him. "Keep clear of him, Polly. Come over here beside me. Now I warn you, Uncle Andrew, don't come one step closer, or we'll just vanish." "Do what you're told this minute, sir," said Uncle Andrew. "You're an extremely disobedient, ill-behaved little boy." "No fear," said Diggory. "We want to stay and see what happens. I thought you wanted to know what about other worlds. Don't you like it now you're here?" "Like it!" exclaimed Uncle Andrew. "Just look at the state I'm in, and it was my best coat and waistcoat, too." He certainly was a dreadful sight by now. For of course, the more dressed up you were to begin with, the worse you looked after you crawled out of a smashed hansom cab and fallen into a muddy brook. "I'm not saying," he added, that this is a most interesting I'm not saying, he added, that this is not a most interesting place. If I were a younger man now, perhaps I could get some lively young fellow to come here first. One of those big game hunters. Something might be made of this country. The climate is delightful. I never felt such air. I believe it would have done me good if circumstances had been more favorable. If only we'd had a gun." "Guns be blowed," said the cabbie. I think I'll can't do his accent again. "I think I'll go see if I can get Strawberry a rub down. That 'orse has more sense than some humans." I can't do it. As I could mention. He walked back to Strawberry and began making the hissing sound. He walked back to Strawberry and began making the hissing noises that grooms make. "Do you still think that lion could be killed by a gun?" asked Diggory. He didn't mind the iron bar much. "Well, all her fault," said Uncle Andrew. "That's a plucky gal, my boy. It was a spirited thing to do." He rubbed his hands and cracked his knuckles, as if he were once more forgetting how the witch frightened him whenever she was really there. "It was a wicked thing to do," said Polly. "What harm has he done to her?" "Hello, what's that?" said Diggory. He had darted forwards to examine something only a few yards away. "I say, Polly," he called back, "do come and look." Uncle Andrew came with her, not because he wanted to see, but because he wanted to keep close to the children. There might be a chance of stealing their rings, but when he saw what Diggory was looking at, even he began to take interest. It was a perfect little model of a lamppost, about 3 feet high, but thickening in proportion, as they watched it, in fact growing, just as the trees had grown. "It's alive, too. It's lit," said Diggory. And so it was, though of course the brightness of the sun made the little flame in the lantern hard to see unless your shadows fell on it. "Remarkable, most remarkable," muttered Uncle Andrew. "Even I never dreamt of magic like this. We're in a world where everything, even a lamppost, comes to life and grows." "Oh no, I lost the pages.
Now, I wonder what sort of seed a lamppost grows from. Don't you see, said Diggory? This is where the bar fell. The bar she tore off the lamppost at home. It sank into the ground, and now it's coming up as a young lamppost. But not so very young now, as it was as tall as Diggory while he said this. That's it! Stupendous, stupendous, said Uncle Andrew, rubbing his hands harder than ever. Ho ho! They laughed at my magic. That fool of a sister of mine thinks I'm a lunatic. I wonder what they'll say now. I have discovered a world where everything is bursting with life and growth. Columbus, now they'll talk about Columbus. But what was America to this? The commercial possibilities of this country are unbounded. Bring a few old bits of scrap iron here, bury 'em, and they'll become a brand new railway, engines, battleships, anything you please. Will cost nothing, and I can sell 'em at full price in England. I shall be a millionaire, and then the climate, I feel years younger already. I can run it as a health resort. A good sanatorium here might be worth 20,000 a year. Of course, I shall have to let a few people into the secret. First thing is to get that brute shot. Just like the witch, said Polly. All you think about is killing things. And then as regards oneself, Andrew continued in a happy dream, there's no knowing how long I might live if I settled here, and there's a big consideration when a fellow has turned 60. I shouldn't be surprised if I never grew a day older in this country. Stupendous, the land of youth. Oh, cried Diggory, the land of youth. Do you think it really is? For of course he remembered what Aunt Letty had said to him. Had said to the lady who brought the grapes, and that sweet hope rushed back to him. Uncle Andrew, he said, do you think there's anything here that would cure Mother? What are you talking about, said Andrew. This isn't a chemist's shop, but as I was saying, you don't care twopence about her, said Diggory savagely. I thought you might, after all. She's your sister, as well as my mother. Well, no matter. I'm jolly well going to ask the lion himself if he can help me. And he turned and walked briskly away. Polly waited for a moment and then went after him. Here, stop, come back. The boy's gone mad, said Uncle Andrew. He followed the children at a cautious distance behind, for he didn't want to get too far away from the green rings or too near the lion. In a few minutes, Diggory came to the edge of the wood, and there he stopped. The lion was singing still, but now the song had once more changed. It was more like what we should call a tune, but it was also far wilder. It made you want to run and jump and climb. It made you want to shout. It made you want to rush at other people and either hug them or fight them. It made Diggory hot and red in the face. It had some effect on Uncle Andrew, for Diggory could hear him saying, a spirited jout, sir. It's a pity about her temper, but a damn fine woman all the same. A damn fine woman. But what the song did to the two humans was nothing compared to what it was doing to the country. Can you imagine a stretch of grassy land bubbling like water in a pot? That is really the best description of what was happening. In all directions, it was swelling into humps. There were very few different sizes, some no bigger than molehills, some as big as wheelbarrows, two the size of cottages, and the humps moved and swelled till they burst, and the crumbled earth poured out of them, and from each hump there came out an animal. The moles came out of just as you might see a mole come out of England. The dogs came out barking the moment their heads were free, and struggling as you'd seen them do when they are getting through a narrow hole in a hedge. The stags were the queerest to watch, for of course the antlers came up a long time before the rest of them, so at first Diggory thought they were trees. The frogs, who all came up near the river, went straight into it with a plop plop and a loud croaking. Panthers, leopards, and things of that sort sat down at once to wash the loose earth off their hindquarters, and then stood up against the trees to sharpen their front claws. Showers of birds came out of the trees, butterflies fluttered, bees got to work on the flowers as if they hadn't a second to lose. But the greatest moment of all was when the biggest hump broke like a small earthquake, and out came the sloping back, the large, wise head, and the four baggy, trouseled legs of an elephant. Now you could hardly hear the song of the lion. There was so much cawing, cooing, crowing, braying, neighing, baying, barking, lowing, bleating, and trumpeting. But though Diggory could no longer hear the lion, he could see it. It was so big and so bright that he could not take his eyes off of it.
The other animals did not appear to be afraid of it. Instead, at that very moment, Diggory heard the sound of hooves from behind. A second later, the old cab horse trotted past him and joined the other beasts. The air had apparently suited him as well as it had suited Uncle Andrew. He no longer looked like a poor old slave he had been in London. He was picking up his beat and holding his head erect. And now, for the first time, the lion was quite silent. He was going to and fro among the animals, and every now and then he would go up to two of them, two at a time, and touch their noses with his. He would touch 2 beavers among all the beavers, 2 leopards among all the leopards, 1 stag, 1 deer among all the deer, and leave the rest. Some sorts of animals he passed over altogether, but the pairs which he had touched instantly left their own kinds and followed him. At last he stood still, and all the creatures whom he had touched came and stood in a wide circle around him. The others whom he had not touched began to wander away. Their noises faded gradually into the distance. The chosen beasts who remained were now utterly silent, all with their eyes fixed instantly upon the lion. Cat-like ones gave an occasional twitch of the tail, but otherwise all were still. For the first time that day there was complete silence, except for the noise of running water. Diggory's heart beat wildly. He knew something very solemn was going to be done. He had not forgotten about his mother, but he knew jolly well that even for her he couldn't interrupt a thing like this. The lion, whose eyes never blinked, stared at the animals as hard as if he was going to burn them up with his mere stare, and gradually a change came over them. The smaller ones, the rabbits, moles, and such like, grew a good deal larger. The very big ones, you noticed it most with the elephants, grew a little smaller. Aww. Well, I'm gonna dismiss this. I'm gonna take a breather. And I'm gonna find my book. And I'm gonna stare to see where I'm into this. Taking a break will I have a chance. We're on page 70. It looks like the first book ends at page 110. So. What time are we at? 12. I'm gonna wait for the ad to finish, and then, because we're just about at the end of this, there's like a little line at the end, and there's no way we're gonna get to the rest of this book tonight, but I'll wait till the ad to finish, read this last little bit, and then probably call it for tonight. I hope everyone's doing well. Don't know how many viewers are here. Yeah, doing good. Actually, you know what? For those of you who don't want to wait for the end of this, I'll read this last little bit, because it really is just like, I put the bookmark in the wrong spot. No. I made a mistake. Wait, I said it was on page 70. There we go. I'll just finish this, and then those of you who don't want to tune in to the rest, I'll just read it again after. The smaller ones, the rabbits, moles, and such like, grew a good deal larger. The very big ones, you noticed it most with the elephants, grew a little smaller. Many animals sat up on their hind legs. Most put their heads up on one side, as if they were trying very hard to understand. The lion opened his mouth, but no sound came out from it. He was breathing out a long, warm breath. It seemed to sway all the beasts as the wind sways a line of trees. Far overhead, from beyond the veil of blue sky, which hid them, the stars sang again, pure, cold, difficult music. Then there came a swift flash like fire, but it burnt nobody, either from the sky or from the lion itself, and every drop of blood tingled in the children's bodies, and the deepest, wildest voice they'd ever heard was saying, Narnia, 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 awake. Love, think, speak, be walking trees, be talking beasts, be divine waters. And now, anyone who's a sub who heard that and doesn't want to hang out for the end, that's valid. We're just gonna wait for the ad to finish, and then I'll read that again, and then probably the hero will raid somebody, I'm assuming. Have you an idea who you'd like to raid? I'd like something quiet. What? It's the middle of the night. Things should be quiet. How long till the ad's up? Ads take too long. Dumb ads. Adorable. Okay, I guess we're going to when we're done, we'll go to the Piglet one, I guess. Do you remember which Kingdom Hearts had the 100-acre woods in it? Was it all of them? We're not going yet, though, right? You know that. Okay. Once, be able to keep doing Sunday night readings, I guess, unless there's an emergency. Oh, okay. So for our ad viewers, continuing, the lion whose eyes never blinked stared at all the animals as hard as if he was going to burn them up with his mere stare. And gradually, a change came over them. The smaller ones, the rabbits, moles, and such like, grew a deal larger. Very big ones, you noticed it most with the elephants, grew a little smaller. Many animals sat up on their hind legs. Most put their heads on one side, as if they were trying very hard to understand. The lion opened his mouth, and a sound came from it. He was breathing out a long, warm breath. It seemed to sway all the beasts as the wind sways a line of trees. Far overhead, beyond the veil of blue sky which hid them, the stars sang again, pure, cold. Then there came a swift flash like fire that burnt nobody, either from the sky or from the line itself, and every drop of blood tingled in the children's bodies, and the deepest, wildest voice they had ever heard was saying, Narnia, Narnia, Narnia wake, love, think, speak, be walking trees, be talking beasts, be divine waters. And that's what we're gonna call it. So, we've got, it looks like another 40 pages left for the first book. Hope everybody had a good time. And if you'd like to hear the continuation of the story, you can either pick up your own books, find them at the library, or I'm certain that there's Audible books online as well that you can find that have read this. Or if you for some reason want to listen to me finish, we'll be back next Sunday at about the same time. It's 9 p.m. where we are. I don't know what your current location is. We're Mountain Time. So yeah, it's 9 starting at 9 p.m.'s Mountain Standard Time. Even if we happen to start the stream earlier, I won't read until 9, but as we're getting more stuff working in the stream and working out the kinks, we might still end up starting a bit later, but take the time, get yourself drinks or whatever. I hope everybody has themselves a good evening, and thank you very much for tuning in to the reading. Audible, yeah. I hope everybody enjoyed themselves. And, yeah. Yay, it was fun. Bye!